Patrick, The Ghosts of Culloden Moor, Book 26. Written by Cathy McRae. Narrated by Andrew McDermott and Jen McGurk. Chapter 1. The witch's words rang in his ears. "Do a good deed, my lad, and earn your boon." Though the expression in her eyes was kind, Patrick could hardly keep his knees from knocking together in fright. The 19th ghost to rise and join the 79, he'd managed to hide until she'd sent far more than 19 ghosts to their doom. 25, as a matter of fact. He closed his eyes in fearful anticipation of what would happen next, and with a flick of her fingers she sent him away from the moor he'd haunted for the past 270 years. What have I gotten myself into? Not the first time he'd asked himself this question, to be sure. Ugh, the lads rallying men to the prince's cause had made war sound so brave. And Patrick had secretly always wanted to be brave. He clenched his fingers over palms calloused by the rub of the butt of the oil he used to punch holes in leather, and crisscrossed by fine white lines of old scars from the knife that shaped the leather soles of shoes he made and sold in his da's cobbler shop. What made him think he could be brave? Making shoes wasn't such a difficult trade, a bit exacting for the more imperious customers, but he'd been born and raised in his da's shop. 'Twas in his blood. The blood he'd spilled on Culloden Moor nearly 300 years ago. His da had shaken his head, clearly grieved his son was headed off to fight for Prince Charlie, but Patrick, imbued with a sense of rightness, and perhaps a few drams of whisky paid for by the Jacobites who'd taken him under their collective wing, felt a deep camaraderie he couldn't shake. He'd argued with his da even as he stuffed his rucksack with a spare shirt and a loaf of bread. "We want a Catholic king back on the throne." "You're daft, Patrick," his da replied, "but I willna stand in your way." He'd pressed a piece of silver into Patrick's hand, closing his fingers over the bit of money Patrick knew was hard come by. "Come home if you can, lad." Patrick had carried the last words his da had spoken deep in his heart since that chilly morn he'd set off from Perth with Lord Kilmarnock's foot guards, a rusty flintlock pistol tucked in his belt. Patrick's thoughts returned to the present. He kept his eyes screwed tightly closed as the air cooled about him, half afraid of what he'd see once he gave in, defeated his mistrust, and looked about. He concentrated on what he knew. The moor in all its manifestations, from the bog he'd died in to the partially drained land he'd roamed the past 270 years. The late summer sun had beamed its dying rays on the waving grass and stones piled into cairns, but its encouraging warmth no longer caressed his skin. Though his blood hadn't heated in nearly 3 centuries, even on those days he remembered to rise from his boggy resting place. He looked forward to the touch of sunlight on his skin each time. One of the simple things he was loath to relinquish. His focus narrowed. Cool air wafted over his skin. Fragile moisture collected on the hairs of his arms and legs. A peculiar odour filled his nostrils. Smoke, yet from neither peat nor wood fire. For a moment he panicked, remembering as if it was only moments ago he'd faced the cloying smoke and rattling musketry of the government forces. The scent caught his notice, forced him to open his eyes and take stock of his new surroundings. A mist hung over him, cool and heavy, sparkling on the 3 stone walls which partially enclosed him. A faint red glow pulsed deep within the mist from the darkness beyond the single opening, and alarm punched like a warm fist in the middle of his chest. He sniffed the air again. nae smoke I've smelled before. He frowned and peered hard at the ruddy light, in and out, bright and dull, its intensity ebbing and flowing beyond the misty veil. Curious in spite of the dread pulling in his stomach, he crossed himself as he rose slowly to his feet, gaze transfixed on the peculiar sight. "Mother Mary, what has the wee lassie done?" Denial struck hard and fast in his staunch Catholic heart. He knew better than to enter into an arrangement with a witch, never mind her sweet bonny face that lit so prettily when she smiled, or her engaging ways that charmed even the dourest of the Culloden ghosts. Though she'd offered him a chance to leave his grave on the moor, he'd hung back, uncertain if he should accept or not, fearful of the cost to his soul. He took a step forward, trembling as he walked to his fate. The ground shook, and a moan rose from the centre of the red glow. Flames spread outward, then died as quickly as they'd appeared. Patrick Lindsay froze in place, his heart clenched tight in his chest. "Well, the bones of St. Andrew, the wee lassie hasna sent me to do a heroic deed. She's sent me straight to hell." Chapter 2. Patrick shook in his worn boots, the hem of his ragged coat flapping about his thighs. His eyes closed again as he muttered a prayer and waited for the wrath of God to sweep him into the yawning jaws of purgatory. He ran his fingers up and down the tattered lapel of his coat, as if fingering the beads of his rosary, his fingertips counting every missing warp and weave of the heavy wool cloth. A drop of moisture slipped from the tip of his nose, and he wiped it away with his sleeve. His eyes began to ache behind their screwed-shut lids, and he slowly forced himself to open them. Nothing in the enclosed area had changed. The red aura remained the same. The fires of hell hadn't reached him yet. With exaggerated care, he edged toward the single opening to the cavernous room. Whether he liked it or not, crossing close to the eerie fire appeared the only way to escape. The ominous colour intensified, but Patrick averted his gaze and slipped through the mist. The air warmed, clawing in the damp. The mist swirled, acting like no fog he'd ever encountered before. It rose in the air, then drew back, like dancers meeting and parting in a ghostly reel. Words, indistinct, wavering, floated to his ears. Patrick stretched up on his toes, straining to see through the mist. His voice, querulous as an old man's, echoed thinly in the chamber. "Who's there?" Instantly the light went out. Laila stiffened. Had someone called? The glowing breath in the centre of the chambered peak was doused as if with a bucket of water. Had Ormarr heard it too? Impossible. 'Twas naught but one way into the large chamber beyond, and she'd seen none enter the caverns in the hours past, unless they'd sprouted wings and flown. Recalled to her mission, she uncovered the small ember resting in a clay jar in the woven reed basket on her arm. The tiny brand glowed as though drawing air through molten lungs. Its red and gold eye stared from inside the dark pot. Laila blew on it gently, then held it to the end of the branch she'd left leaning against the wall on her last trip to the caves 2 days earlier. The stick, damp from its time in the mist, sputtered in protest as the spark nipped at its charred end. After a few moments of argument, the brand lit, and Laila held it carefully aloft. Streaks of gold and red ran wetly down the rock walls of the cavern, reflections of the torch's glow. Enormous puddles of opaque black water pocked the stone floor. Laila knew most to be little deeper than the soles of her low boots, but the impenetrable darkness made even the shallow ones appear bottomless. She ignored the deceptive pools, searching the many side chambers for the beast she knew lived within.
Ormarr?
A trail, darker and thicker than the water, led to the left. With the familiarity of many years exploring the forbidden cave, Laila stepped forward. "Can you help me?" The voice she'd thought she imagined earlier trailed thinly through the chamber. She sent a startled look over her shoulder, torn between seeking Ormarr, who she knew hid from her, nursing his injury, and discovering who was lost on the forbidden isle. A bass voice rumbled. "See who it is, lass. I will nae perish this night." With a sigh, Laila disregarded his order, and instead continued to Ormarr's chamber. She edged around the rim of a puddle in an effort to keep the hem of her skirt from becoming more of a sopping mess than it already was. She'd misjudged the depth of the tide in the dark, and stepped ashore before her tiny boat had come to a complete rest against the pebbled beach. Between the cold night air and the scolding she was sure to get when she returned home, it looked to be an uncomfortable evening. Peeking around the corner into the next chamber, she caught sight of a man, broad-shouldered and muscled, though his steel-grey hair and wrinkled face marked him clearly past his prime. He leaned against the wall, fingers plucking at a wren beneath one arm. Blood, as black as pitch, trailed down his side. He waved away Laila's shocked gasp. "Dinna fash, 'tis naught you can do." Laila's heart twisted. Though uncertain how old Ormarr truly was, she'd recently noticed certain signs of aging, shortness of breath, a tendency toward a bit of extra rest, a faraway look in eyes that had once seemed so alive and mysterious, now deep sunken amid numerous wrinkles, and a lack of tolerance for what he termed interference from her. She inhaled sharply against the sorrow in her heart.
"I'll leave the basket with you, so you may dress the wound."
It was difficult to leave without caring for Ormarr herself, but 'twas clear he brooked no protest, and they could both be in danger if someone else roamed the caves.
"I'll see who's about."
Shadows flickered across his face as he gave a short nod, emphasizing the years on a visage she'd once thought timeless. Laila set the basket on the stone beside him. "Thank ye for your care, lass." His voice, always gravelly and deep, warmed her heart and made her think on happier days. She met his gaze, bravely holding back tears.
"I'll help in whatever way needed."
"It has always been so." This time he managed a half-smile she knew was for her benefit. With a final wave, he dismissed her. Laila swallowed against her distress.
Freya's cold hard toes. Why pick now of all times to send a stranger into the caves?
No one of her clan would dare the cliffs of the Forbidden Isle. They feared equally the healer who marked the ancient herb gardens on the sheltered side of the island as her private domain, and the old legend of the dragon who inhabited the hollow peak of the mountain. The legend which had been brought to life again today after years of disuse. Shaking her head against the foolishness that had resulted in her friend's injury, Laila glided cautiously into the hall. Chapter 3. A circle of golden light broke through the mist, mesmerizing Patrick with its glow. He stared into the pulsing radiance as it grew larger, undulating rays against the darkness. His heart leapt, thumping wildly in his chest. He swallowed against fear and patted the rusty pistol in his belt for bravery.
"Is anyone here?"
A sweet, feminine voice echoed off the wet stone walls of the cavern like the tinkle of a bell. Patrick's ears warmed. Lasses were kind to him, but had never shown him much interest beyond superficial flattery for his skills as a shoemaker. He attempted an air of nonchalance, as he'd seen other men do around a pretty lass. Aye. He waited a moment, but heard no reply. He tried again. I seem to be lost. Blast, would a real man admit he's lost? Patrick's shoulders drooped. Dark eyes set in a pale heart-shaped face appeared, golden hair glimmering about her face like a halo in the torchlight. The woman approached, a thin cloak draped over her simple gown. The delicate aroma of lavender and a hint of something spicy drifted to his nose. She gave him an appraising stare.
How'd you come here?
Her words, firm yet kind, sounded a bit strange to his ears, the shape of them almost foreign. Patrick offered a tentative smile. I dinna know. He shrugged, searching his brain for an adequate reply. There was a bit of a stramash. He shrugged again. A stramash, and a few 100 years. But he didn't think it wise to admit to the last part. The woman lifted her torch and peered past him. Apparently seeing nothing, she sighed and motioned at him with her free hand.
Follow me. The way out is dangerous. You dinna wish to fall into a hole, do you?
Patrick's boots clattered on the stone as he stumbled, his gaze snatched from the enchanting twinkle in the woman's eyes to the warning glitter of black water on the floor. She shook her head, but led him through the winding passages of the cave without another word. They stepped through the opening of the caverns. The heavens sparkled with stars suspended in a clear night sky. Mist crept along the shore, partially hiding a small boat dragged clear of the lapping water. The odour of smoke was swept away by salty sea air, and Patrick marvelled as he inhaled the fresh, briny scent.
Do you know your way home from here?
Startled from his experimentations with breathing, an act he'd not accomplished in nearly 300 years, Patrick glanced at the lass. Passing through, I think. The woman frowned.
You've no kin here? And you travel alone?
Her raised brows made Patrick wonder at the wisdom of his decision to accept the wee witch's challenge. He peered into the night with some concern. Far from setting him in a place eager for his heroic deed, whatever it was, she dropped him in the middle of nowhere, which was admittedly better than hell. I'll be fine, he whispered, though he doubted the words. Dinna fish about me. He cleared his throat and forced his lips into a grin. The woman sighed.
You can sleep in the stable with the cow tonight, but you must be on your way come morning. My dad doesn't trust strangers.
Patrick winced, reminded he was indeed a stranger in an unknown place. As bright as the stars were, they were no match for the glow of man-made lights which no longer warmed the night sky, and the air hung soft about him without the fumes automobiles had brought to the moor. His hand strayed again to the worn butt of his pistol. The woman's sharp intake of breath jerked his attention to the sudden alarm stretched across her features, her stare snapping from his hand to his face.
Who are you? And why are you here?
In the shadows, the man had seemed little more than a lost soul, his tilted head and rounded shoulders apologetic and completely non-threatening. But as his hand drifted to his waist, the moon chose that moment to shine its light on the stranger's odd clothing and even odder weapon. For Laila was certain the flash of light struck from metal embedded in what appeared to be a somewhat curved wooden stick. Did he intend to attack her with it? Those who lived along the shore wouldn't dare harm her. Despite dark murmurs, she balanced the line between witch and healer quite effectively. But what would a stranger know of her power or lack? Used to walking the beach unmolested, Laila faltered as a tendril of fear curled itself about her stomach and slid upward. She swallowed against the unwelcome sensation. The man flinched and glanced down at his clothing. He appeared flustered by her question. "My name's Patrick Lindsay. I dinna know quite why I'm here, but I mean nae harm." Laila indicated his weapon with a nod.
What's that?
He seemed startled as he glanced at his waist, but pulled the stick smoothly from his belt. "'Tis a flintlock pistol." He shrugged one shoulder as he turned it over in his hands. "Not a very fine one, and rusted as well. It fired its final shot long years ago. 'Tis nae loaded now." Though she strained her ears against the man's accent, it was the words themselves that defeated her.
What's a flintlock pistol?
Patrick's gaze leapt to hers. "Ye haven't heard of a pistol?" Laila shook her head.
Nay, is it a weapon?
"Okay." He held it aloft, pointing with one finger to the length of the stick. "You put your lead ball and such in here, then aim and pull the trigger."
Lead ball? Trigger?
Laila squinted at his demonstration, trying to understand what seemed commonplace to him.
What happens when you pull the trigger?
The man tossed her a wry grin. "It makes a very loud noise with lots of smoke. If you're lucky, you hit the lad you've aimed at." Laila's eyebrows shot upward.
Hit?
"Aye, with the wee ball."
Does it hurt?
Patrick nodded vigorously. "Aye, it can kill ye or knock a hole in an arm or leg." Laila recalled his words.
But only if you're lucky, aye?
He nodded.
Why is that?
"Och, it isna a very accurate weapon at much of a distance, and I'm not a very good shot." A chill skittered down Laila's spine.
I've never seen anything like it.
Patrick jammed a hand into his sporran. "Would you like me to show ye?" Laila waved her hand at him and cast a quick look over her shoulder.
Nay, 'tis a bit late to be making noise and smoke. I dinna wish anyone harm. The last thing I need is to rouse Ormarr or the clansmen.
Patrick dropped whatever he'd reached for back into his sporran, a disappointed look on his face. "I suppose not." His look brightened. "What's your name, lass? I've told you mine."
My name's Laila. I'm the clan healer.
She motioned for him to follow.
Come, let's get you settled for the night. I'll show you the road south in the morning.
"South? Why south?" Laila lifted her torch, keeping watch for stones and roots in the path.
You cannae go further north from here save on a ship. And there'll be none again till spring.
Patrick hurried to her side, matching his stride to hers. "Storms?" She tossed her reply over her shoulder.
Nay, Vikings.
Chapter 4. Patrick skidded to a halt. Vikings! What had the wee witch done? He was no match for Vikings. Their strength was legendary. Their savagery quailed at nothing. No force was known to stop them, not to mention the berserkers who were said to chew their own shields. Patrick firmly clamped down his runaway imagination. "Get hold of yourself, man. Soni promised 1 or 2 days for a heroic deed. How likely will it be to run into a Viking force in the next few hours?" My breeze kicked up over the ocean, slapping Patrick with cold fingers and unexpected force. A breeze that could push a longship right to the shore. He cast a worried look over his shoulder, but observed no menacing shadow of impending doom on the horizon. Glancing back at Laila, he noticed her shoving the boat into the water between the island and the far shore. He hurried to her side. "I can do that." He put his shoulder to the wooden frame, happy to have something to which he could lend his strength. Laila stumbled as the little boat lurched away, but caught herself, one hand gripping the prow.
"I dinna need help. Here."
She thrust the torch at him, and he grabbed it by reflex. She jerked her chin at the boat.
"Get in."
Patrick played the gallant. Losses first. Instead of displaying a becoming blush, with perhaps a pert giggle, Laila scowled.
"My boat. I give the orders."
Somewhat chastened, Patrick stepped into the boat, remembering to keep his body low. The wooden craft danced up and down beneath his feet, but the soles of his boots didn't slip on the slick boards. He gave a nod of satisfaction. Almost as good as Da's work. Even after nearly a month of campaigning in the weeks leading up to Culloden, the stitching had unravelled very little, and the soles, though worn, were still in one piece. He pivoted and sat on the slender bench at the stern, a smile on his face at the sudden thought of his father. A twinge of remorse to wonder what he'd thought when he, Patrick, hadn't returned home. Had anyone told him his son had died on Culloden Moor, would his father have thought him brave? Laila took the torch from him.
"Grab the oars."
He'd never know the answer to his questions, and shook his head to clear the wistful thoughts, as he'd done so many times in the centuries past. He glanced quickly to either side, spying the slender oars, and slid them out into the water. His shoulders felt the strain as he dragged the boat against the waves and into deeper water. Laila sat in the V of the prow, silent and watchful as they slid through the water. Moonlight struck her hair, gilding the golden locks to bright silver. Patrick watched her face, lost in the confident beauty of her poise, her regal carriage telling him she was a woman used to getting her way. Nary a passionate kiss whilst I was alive. I've 2 days as a man again, my last 2 days on earth. What chance do I have? Laila rose to a half-crouch, leaning forward as the boat scraped against the opposite shore. Patrick slid the oars inside the boat as the healer stepped over the side and into the shallow water, giving Patrick a glimpse of slender ankles and sturdy boots. She cast an impatient look over her shoulder.
"Come on."
Patrick closed his mouth and slowly slid his gaze back to her face. He thought her cheeks darkened, blushed. The thought warmed him, but he sighed. Nay, the lass is too confident, too beautiful. I'm nae likely to give her cause to blush. He carefully rose from his seat and stepped out of the small craft onto the rocky shore. Giving the tattered rope a good tug, he dragged the boat away from the waves. Laila gave a short nod of approval and strode up the beach to a small house, its roof thickly thatched. She pointed to a similar structure a few feet away.
"That's the stable. You'll find a pile of hay to sleep on. 'Tis warm and dry inside. You'll be gone in the morning."
Patrick felt her words more of an order than an inquiry, and since he didn't know what the wee witch Soni expected of him, he shrugged, running the fingers of his left hand up and down the lapels of his jacket. Laila's gaze fixed on a spot near his heart.
"You're injured."
Startled, Patrick glanced down, drawing aside the coat's edge. Oh, 'tis but a nick. The stark reminder of the battle and the wound that took his life made his stomach heave. His shoulders hunched forward, forestallingly nausea at the memory of smoke and slate, of thundering artillery and piercing cries of blood and pain and fear. Laila grasped his elbow gently and guided him inside the stable. With a firm push, she seated him amid the hay. The scent of faded summer drifted to his nose, dispelling the aura of that last cold day on Culloden Moor. He took a deep breath and tilted his head to stare into her face. Concern etched delicate lines across her brow, and a fine golden curl slipped from behind one ear to nestle lightly against her cheek. Patrick bit his lip to keep from lifting his fingers to touch the bright strand. The healer slid her torch into a bracket on the wall.
Pull your jacket off and let me take a look.
Patrick wished he was bold enough to deny her command, but he couldn't withstand the no-nonsense tone of her voice. He slowly shrugged his shoulders and pulled his arms free of the coat. Looking down, he fingered the jagged tear in his shirt, picking at the charred bit of fabric that was beyond repair. Blood stained an area the size of his palm, dark and ominous. She gasped.
Och, dinna do that. You dinna wish to start it bleeding again.
Patrick pushed against the sight. Though pain had once exploded through him with incredible force as the grape shot ripped through his chest, there'd been no pain since. The hole had become a part of him since he'd risen from his muddy grave. Tonight, to his surprise, he was whole. He looked for a way to explain the lack of a wound. I dinna believe the blood is mine." Laila settled on her knees before him and loosened the tie at the neck of his shirt. Pulling it aside, she inspected the upper part of his chest. Heat infused Patrick's skin, swirling lower and lower until he shifted uncomfortably in the hay. Laila leaned back on her heels and placed her hands in her lap.
You appear to be well.
Her brows knitted together in puzzlement.
What happened? You're a bafflement to me.
Thoughts jumbled in Patrick's head as he tugged the laces off his shirt together. His skin tingled where her fingertips had touched. Such an impersonal gesture, healer to patient, yet he burned. He cursed his fingers silently as they fumbled the knot at his neck. "I was in a wee stramash." Laila reached up and deftly secured the ties, then settled back, her head tilted in encouragement.
You said that earlier.
Both eyebrows lifted. Patrick pursed his lips, playing for time to sort his thoughts. "Aye, 'twas a battle."
Near here?
She gave him a worried look, drawing back as though uneasy. Patrick glanced about, trying to determine exactly where here was, though it scarcely mattered. From the look of Laila's clothing and her unfamiliarity with a pistol, and if her fear of Vikings was anything to judge by, it appeared the wee witch had sent him back in time, years back, possibly centuries. 'Twas many days' march away. Her posture relaxed. "I've been wandering for some time now." 'Twas true enough. He'd been wandering the moor for a great deal of time. We'd travelled a distance and our clothing was tatty. He fingered the hole again. When the battle was over, I exchanged mine for this. A small lie, perhaps necessary. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth.
Exchanged? You took a shirt from a dead man, then gave him yours?
"Why wouldn't I?" he asked, taken aback. "I wasn't stealing." Amusement blossomed across her face, dancing merrily in her eyes. Patrick was smitten, even if she teased him.
You didn't have ill-gotten gold in your pockets? Jewels? Weapons?
God help him, but he loved the sound of her voice, though he feared Laila thought him a thief. Patrick shoved his hands into his coat pockets, turning them inside out. "Empty," he protested. Her glance dropped to his sporran. With a sigh, he opened it. 2 bits of silver, 1 bullet, a piece of wadding, and lint for making a fire. He showed her the items. Nary a jewel or other piece of stolen goods. He repacked the lot, though I'd give them to ye if I had any. Laila canted her head.
What do you mean?
He cleared his throat, searching for his voice, which had suddenly left him. You should wear jewels, and fine silks and linens, to match your beauty. For a moment he thought she would laugh at him. Hate stung his cheeks.
'Tis lovely of you to say so, but I'm a simple healer, and have no need of such things.
She cast a look at the barn, sturdy yet plain, stark and sufficient, without a single trapping of affluence beyond the prestige of the building itself.
Nor am I likely to attain them.
With a quick intake of breath, she grinned.
'Tis well that I'm a plain lass, aye?
He disagreed. You aren't a plain. I've never seen hair such as yours, the colour of the purest gold, your skin as soft and supple as the finest kid leather. This time she did laugh, the sound of simple amusement, no notes of derision marring the lovely sound. Nevertheless, Patrick's neck heated. Laila patted the back of his hand.
I've never had my skin likened to fine leather, and not certain if 'tis a compliment or not.
Patrick nodded vigorously. Aye, there isn't a finer feel beneath my fingertips than kid leather. 'Tis very fine, a pleasure to touch. Her gaze turned inquisitive.
You aren't a soldier, are you, Patrick?
His hand patted the pistol in his belt. I was. His throat tightened, robbing the volume of his words again. For a brief time, I was a soldier.
What were you before you went to war?
I was a shoemaker, like my da.
'Tis an honourable trade, though I have a feeling things are very different in your village.
Patrick glanced at the young woman and caught the puzzlement in her eyes as she stared at his boots. Unease swept over him, aware of the differences in their attire. Where? No, when had the wee witch sent him? Self-conscious, he rubbed at a scuffed, muddy spot on his right boot. My da's the master. His shoes are so fine, they're like wearing a glove, supple and light. They dinna simply fit your feet, they caress them. At the thought of caresses, a lump rose huge in his throat, and an answering one beneath his sporran. Silence filtered through the cracks in the wooden walls of the barn, heavy with confusion, pregnant with indecision.
Tell me about yourself.
Laila's words settled over him with the comfort of a worn plaid, warm, familiar, inviting. He glanced at her face, light from the mouldering torch lacing her features with gold. His lips parted, but what could he tell her? I'm a ghost. I was alive centuries from now. Let a wee witch send me here. Where is here? Patrick glanced past her to the partially open doorway. Shouldn't ye be going home, lass? Laila settled in the pile of straw, curling her legs beneath her skirt.
Tell me why you went to battle.
Patrick's hopes fell. He wasn't a soldier. He'd only ever been a shoemaker, until... Laila's eyebrows inched slowly upward, inviting his reply.
Why?
Patrick hung his head and murmured through a soft sigh. Because I wished to be brave. Chapter 5. Laila blinked, bewildered.
He wished to be brave. Of all the men.
She dropped her gaze to control her eye roll, her exasperation. Patrick seemed sincere, and she did not wish to add to his shame. She chose her words carefully.
I sense you are a careful man. Kind.
Eye roll under control, she lifted her gaze.
Why did you choose battle to prove your courage?
Patrick sat motionless for a moment, then leaned back against the stable wall. Every older man in Perth was a braw fighter. We'd been without our king, leader for years, and this was to be our chance to win our freedom. None included me in their plans. They gathered around the table at the meeting house, loud, cuffing each other on the shoulder in camaraderie. The lasses serving drinks cozied up to them, offering them more food, more drink, more. His shoulders drooped, reflecting his awkwardness. My glass wasn't refilled. Lasses and men, a chilling combination at the best of times. Laila wanted to shake her head, shake him.
Why must you preen and pose and fight to prove your worth? Does no one value Cam's strength and kindness?
Patrick sent her a startled glance, and she realised she'd spoken aloud. Heat warmed her ears.
I'm sorry. As a healer, I see the results of too many fights that seem pointless. I often wonder why men fight.
Patrick sighed. To show. I dinna know. I just know I wasn't counted among the braw men of our village, and it hurt. His fist burrowed against the centre of his chest. Laila let silence simmer for a few moments.
Did you get your wish? To be brave?
The man's gaze seemed to turn in on himself, a trait she'd seen in men mortally wounded, contemplating their lives in those very last moments. When he spoke, his voice whispered like autumn leaves, scraping along a pathway before a ragged breeze. We'd marched for days. The night before the battle, we slogged through mud and snow all night, without sleep or food or rest. We were meant to catch the government forces unawares before dawn, but the plan went awry, and we were turned back before we reached the enemy. Exhausted, we returned to Inverness. Some men tried to get a bit of rest, others headed out in search of food. Patrick stared at his hands turned palm up in his lap. I only wanted rest. He sighed, a brittle sound, but his words gained a bit of strength. We mustered on the moor not long after, bleary-eyed and hungry. In 2 rows we faced the government troops across a muddy bog as sleet bit into our skin. My regiment was Lord Kilmarnock's foot guards, placed on the second line. We waited and waited for the command to attack, whilst the cannon and grape shot felled men all around us. His eyes, bleak with memory, lifted, caught Laila's gaze. I wasn't brave. I was too frightened to move. Patrick's unfamiliar words brushed past her. Cannon, regiment, grape shot. She saw his anguish.
It takes bravery to overcome the urge to flee.
His gaze dropped again, and he tilted his head as if considering her words. Mayhap, though it felt like despair to remain in place, and cowardice to hope our line would not be required to advance into the slaughter.
Brave men feel afraid. Even the mightiest warrior faces battle with fear in his heart. It makes him alert, focused. But to continue when things look bleakest takes confidence in oneself and in the reason he fights.
I dinna truly know why I was there. What could I, a shoemaker, contribute? The other men were right. Why should I believe I could help put a king on a throne? Laila cantered her head. A king, news indeed.
Why did you believe that?
Patrick's barking laughter startled her with its derisive sound. Because I listened to the men who skilfully wove their tales of oppression and murder, and because they at last included me as one of them. He sighed. And because I'd one glass of usquebaugh too many to think straight when I went home to pack my gear.
Water of life. We use it as an elixir for colic and other gastric upsets.
A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth.
And occasionally in the men's ceremonies. Perhaps often.
Things aren't so different here, are they? A look of hope crossed Patrick's face. Laila's breath caught. 'Twas clear Patrick was of neither her place nor time. She believed in the Fae, had dealings with them in fact, but others of her clan would consider it blackest magic, heresy to the church if they thought him different, couldn't explain his clothing or his weapon. She risked her life to help this man, but she could not turn him out on the road in the morning as she'd planned. Alone, trusting he would perish quickly, likely at the hands of an angry mob. She let her breath out in a rush of decision. Holding his gaze, she leaned forward slightly.
Tell me where you're from, Patrick. I must know more about you to be able to help. The place and the year, please.
Place and year? Mother Mary, how does she know? Patrick faltered, a sick feeling in the pit of his stomach, as if he'd swallowed several pints too many of water or whisky. I'm from a place in Scotland called Perth, near the River Tay. He hoped she'd forget she'd asked the year. She hadn't. Laila gave a brief nod, then raised her eyebrows, inviting the rest of his answer. He swallowed past the burn of dread in his throat. In the year of our Lord 1746. Her eyebrows stretched further upward, then relaxed. A tiny grin gave Patrick a small sense of relief.
'Tis good to know our people have survived so long.
Ugh, and even longer. He kicked himself mentally for his blunder. What year is this?
If you ask our priest, he'll tell you 'tis the year of our Lord 956. To the rest of us, 'tis the second year of King Mael MacDonald, who became king when his cousin Constantine abdicated to become a monk. I often wonder if our people will see the next 100 years.
A smile ghosted about Laila's lips.
But the trouble's affecting us all. 'Tis a wonder humankind survives another 1,000 years or so. We still reel from the Viking and Pict invasions. You'll find both Viking and Gael names and customs among us here.
Laila settled more comfortably in the straw.
Now, I think you should tell me your whole story, lad.
It was the word lad that soothed him. It would have been nice for her to refer to him in a more intimate manner, to indicate she had a personal interest in him, but he had to admit it would have only flustered him, and he already worried enough about many things. His decision to become a soldier, the distress he was sure to have caused his father, accepting the wee witch's offer, and his immortal soul. He was a little hesitant to tell the beautiful healer everything. The interest she showed could scarcely be more than simple curiosity, a healer's quest for knowledge. But what would she do if she discovered his many faults? I've already told ye about the battle.
I didn't believe you've told me everything. Begin where you left off. In the middle of battle, I believe.
Patrick took a deep breath, more to give his words strength than to bolster his courage. He disliked sounding weak, and he did not wish to disappoint Laila. Once the command came to advance, the front line spilled across the field. Our soldiers clashed with the government forces, fighting fiercely. Hundreds died within minutes. Lord George Murray, so proud and determined upon his horse as he charged into battle, fled back on foot to those of us in the second line. We followed him as he returned to the Stramash, taking us and 2 other regiments to support the front lines. We could see what lay ahead, but still we followed. Patrick shook his head. Nothing could be done. All was lost. Our soldiers had been destroyed by the government troops, and we turned about and cut our way back, swords in hand. He forced a half-smile to his lips. I didn't make it. Her look was intent, but not horrified, and Patrick breathed more easily. The wound on my chest. He broke off, glancing at the spot where no injury lingered. Well, that was my blood, as you thought. He fingered the cloth. She healed me. Laila's eyes narrowed.
Healed you? From such a wound?
Och, nay, I died that day. I've been a ghost for nearly 300 years. The healer tilted her head.
You died in 1746?
Patrick nodded.
And you were a ghost for 300 years?
He shifted uncomfortably on the hay. 270, actually. Laila released a whoosh of breath.
I believe many things, Patrick. Many that you didn't understand, and even more that my clansmen didn't dare to accept as true. Your story, however, stretches my imagination a wee bit.
Downcast, Patrick dropped his gaze again to his lap. How could she possibly believe in a time she'd never known, never heard of? He'd expected too much.
How did you come here?
Patrick jerked his head up, startled. She still wished to speak with him after telling her what she should consider to be complete nonsense or worse. He stared into her dark eyes, noticingly gold flecks in the brown depths. He was certain she was the kindest lass he'd ever met. Against his better judgment, he told her the part that should damn him forever. I accepted a challenge from a witch. Her gaze did not waver. He frowned. 16 years ago, 16 of my years. It still didn't sound right. He shook his head and gave up trying to determine time. A wee lass named Soni visited the battlefield with her parents when she was but a bairn. There were 79 ghosts who rose together after the battle, bound by our dissatisfaction with those who sacrificed us against the enemy that day. This lass could see us, speak to us. Over the years she befriended us, and we looked forward to her visits. Then, this summer solstice, Soni arrived with a challenge. She told us she is distressed because we haven't moved on, that we still grumble about the Moor. We were each offered the chance to perform a heroic deed. If we succeed, we will be allowed to speak to Prince Charlie, and then rest in peace. It was this last that had sealed the bargain for him, though he wondered if he would be allowed to rest in peace after following a witch. It seemed at odds with his faith, and Patrick was fairly certain that, if he'd asked his priest, the man would have counselled him to stay away from such folly. But he craved peace, not the half-rest, half-rising experiences of the past centuries, fraught with mud and tourists, fear and despair, but the true rest of the deserving. Except, was he deserving?
What's your deed? What must you do? Mayhap I can help.
Elation flooded Patrick's heart. The lass, instead of reviling him, or worse, laughing, offered to help. He knew he'd never seen the like of such a bonny lass, so caring, so brave. I canna allow you to help me, Patrick said, mourning every word. 'Tis enough others may think my soul in peril for accepting help from a witch. I canna let that happen to you. Laila's eyes twinkled in the torchlight.
Och, dinny fash. What your Soni offered was out of the kindness of her heart, not some plot to ensnare your soul.
She canted her head to the side.
Do you think the evil ones are so desperate?
She fluttered her fingers at him.
Man is quite capable of putting his own soul in harm's way. There's scarcely a need to seek it a purpose.
Patrick sighed, admitting the accuracy of her statement. The truth is, I didn't know what my challenge is, only that I'll be given an opportunity to do a heroic deed and a day, mayhap two, to see it done. He scrunched his face, attempting humour as he peered about the neat, weather-tight stable, its occupants dozing contentedly. I didn't see anyone in danger here. Laila's sweet laugh lightened his heart, almost convincing him he was invincible, weightless, free. A smile tugged at his lips, and he feasted his eyes on the beauty before him. The door to the barn crashed open, and Laila leapt to her feet, shock whitening her face. 3 men charged through the doorway, a torch flickering in one man's fist. "Here she is!" They surrounded Laila, jerking her hands behind her back, binding them tight before Patrick could do more than blink. A 4th man, older, wrinkled distress in his features, hung in the doorway, wringing his hands. "I couldn't stop them," the older man's voice whined, eyes lingering on Laila's face. She shot him an aggrieved look.
"You are the head of this clan, and yet you allow these—"
Her gaze swept the other 3 with disdain.
"these troublemakers to tell you how to handle your own daughter."
A shudder rippled across his shoulders. "I had no choice. My life is forfeit if I succour a witch." Chapter 6. Patrick's jaw dropped. A witch? No wonder she didn't fear what I've done. Confusion drew his brows together. She was kind to me, helped me. Is she truly a witch? He stole a look at Laila. Her eyes sparked angrily, but sorrow and perhaps despair flashed amid other emotions he could not name. 2 of the men shoved roughly at her shoulders, forcing her around. She took a stumbling step toward the door. Flinging a last look at him, she uttered 2 words before they hauled her into the night.
"No pistol."
Cold air blasted through the open door, but Patrick ignored the chill, mulling over her words. No pistol? Of course she had no pistol. Had never heard of one until he... A warning, then. A reminder that he had what none of them did. A request. Surely she did not expect him to fire it, use it to save her. They burned witches, and he doubted it was different in Laila's time than in his. The older man's voice interrupted Patrick's thoughts. "Who are ye, and what were ye doing with my daughter?" Patrick tore his gaze from the empty doorway, startled to find Laila's father standing close. "I lost my way and she offered shelter. Will ye nae speak for her?" The man drew his cloak close about his frame, as though to make himself smaller, or perhaps ward off a blow. "I cannae help her further. She chose her life, and must live it." Patrick snorted. "Die for it, ye mean? Is she truly a witch?" "'Tis for the clan to decide." With a dramatic gesture, Laila's father shook his cape free, the mud-stained hem swirling about his feet as he strode to the door. Before Patrick thought to stop him, he was gone. "'Tis a fine kettle Soni's left me to stew in. I dinna know how she expects me to save a witch from burning." His short laugh was mirthless, fearful. "Me? Protect a witch?" He crept to the door, half expecting to find the night sky rent with the bloodstain of Laila's pyre. But though a number of torches pulsed in the dark, they appeared not to emanate from a single source. Patrick's shadow leapt at his feet, growing shorter as warmth from a lit brand slid across the side of his face. 2 men hefting a pair of torches stalked past, heading for the gathering taking place just ahead. Patrick shoved his pistol to the back of his waistband, hiding it beneath his jacket, then darted after them. "Wait!" 2 pairs of eyes swept over him in a cursory glance, their attention split between the ruckus ahead and the oddly dressed man next to them. The lighter-haired man motioned for Patrick to join them, though the leaner man with dark hair scowled and muttered something that didn't quite reach Patrick's ears. Unused to the ready inclusion, Patrick leapt forward, hurrying to keep in step. "Is she really a witch?" The second man sent another scowl his way, making Patrick feel much the outsider. Heat flushed his cheeks. 'Tis water full of a da says. He had no choice, the blond man retorted. Not with the evidence before him. Patrick grabbed at the chance to hear what he wanted desperately to know. What evidence is that? Why, the dragon, of course. Halting on the edge of the gathering crowd, Patrick's new acquaintances argued the merits of the dragon. Torn between the need for comfort from danger in numbers and the desire to fade into the darkness and away from whatever madness Soni had dropped him into the middle of, Patrick lingered, one ear primed for the rustle of dragon's wings, the other listening to the grumbles around him. An old man raged, his wide eyes glowing with fanatical fervour in the bobbing torchlight. The old dragon has returned. I'll give him a good clip with a sword, chimed another. That witch spoiled his aim. She consorts with all manner of fae. Burn her. Patrick startled at the cries erupting around him. Burn the witch. Send her and the devil's spawn back to hell. She's a healer, and she was nice to me. Patrick winced, drawing back as though he'd been struck. I cannae fight a raving mob. His glance darted over the men and a few women who formed the seething crowd raging for Laila's blood. Will they not give her a chance to speak? He snorted. Gerard Justice. The lean, dark man stepped closer. What's that? Will you not try the lass before you punish her? Patrick gulped, unsure from where his bold question arose. Or will you condemn her without a trial? Some would say a witch doesn't deserve a trial, the dark man ventured. A witch deserves to burn, his lighter-haired companion declared. Dread trickled up Patrick's arms and legs like the unwelcome sensation of a flame moving slowly over his skin. She was kind to me. Is there anyone here who would help her? The dark man eyed him narrowly. You could attract attention with words like that. A few may sympathise, but others will claim she bewitched ye, and ye will burn as well. The crowd's angry cries tore at Laila as fully as did the hands that tugged her back and forth, keeping her off balance, unable to draw her frightened wits together. She fought to remain calm, but as the seam on her cloak ripped, so did her control.
Ormarr!
The cry sprang from her throat, torn from the dark depths of her fear. As she summoned the dragon, she gasped in horror at what she'd done, for no matter his injury, she knew he would not fail her. Two men dragged her to a hewn tree stump which could have been a dais to display her on, or the beginnings of a pyre. She remained on her feet, but barely, swaying from shock and abuse. Her shoulders were wrenched and sore, and she was certain her arms sported bruises, while her legs stood as steady as mud after a spring rain. Torches stabbed the ground in a perimeter about her, and their heat caused a trickle of sweat to dampen the back of her gown. Her cloak hung unevenly about her shoulders, its seams gaping like the mouth of a drunken lout. Laila shivered, terror springing across her skin in tiny bumps, as shock slid icily through her veins. She consorts with the Fae. The man to her right shoved his fist into the air and received a shouted aye of affirmation from the crowd. She's a witch and has sold her soul to the devil. He pumped his arm once more. The crowd roared, Aye! Laila searched the mass of milling people, seeking a friendly face, someone who would speak for her. But the faces, contorted by anger and fear of the unknown, met her gaze with blazing, critical eyes.
Ugh, no!
Along the edge of the crowd, she spied Patrick, his lips turned down, his face unhappy. Next to him stood a man she felt sure had orchestrated the mob, his blonde hair an indeterminate, ruddy shade in the torchlight.
If Harold takes a good look at Patrick, the lad will join me before he knows what happened.
A small sigh of relief whispered past her dry lips as she spotted Gregor beside them, his dark scowl telling her he did not approve of the night's activities. Her heart warmed for his concern, but she knew there was nothing he could do. There had been an attraction between them once, but his pledge had been given to another, and no matter if he regretted his decision or not, her life was not his to defend. She completed her scan of the crowd. There was no one present who would stand with Gregor, but perhaps he would keep Patrick safe. Why had Patrick not fled when they dragged her from the barn? Had he not understood the message she tried to send him? Unless the pistol was a better weapon than he admitted, his life would quickly be forfeit once daylight came, and the clan people took note of the stranger among them. Overhead, the whipping sound of billowing sails captured her attention. Rhythmic, the beat filled the air, and Laila's captors cringed. Her heart soared, and a tiny smile touched her lips. No Viking sail ever stretched as tight before a wind. Ormarr was here. Chapter 7. Torches guttered beneath the whoosh of air, only to snatch upright again as the dragon's wings sucked the flames into the updraft. Cries of fear crackled, and people fell to the ground, their arms cast over their heads. Only Patrick and one other remained standing. Patrick gaped in a mixture of horror and disbelief at the enormous creature as it settled next to Laila, its long neck snaking protectively around the healer as it studied the crowd through sparkling gold eyes. Wounded betrayal sluiced through Patrick as he met Laila's gaze over the heads of the downed clansmen. If he'd entertained any doubts she was a witch, witnessing her summon a monster extinguished them without a trace. "'Twas for naught my priest forbade discourse with a witch. I've been tempted twice, and yet I remain on my feet." Freed from restraint, Laila quickly clambered aboard the dragon's shoulder, using his raised foreleg as a step to boost herself up, and sat between two dorsal ridges. Smoke roiled from the beast's nostrils, filling the air with the stench of char, and something Patrick could not describe. The dragon surged into the air with a powerful leap and downstroke of his wings. Air rushed from beneath the rather fragile-looking pinions with a boom, dousing the torches in the blink of an eye. Ice flashed across his skin, a combination of fear and bitter cold. A keening cry bled through the darkness as people rose to their feet and called to each other, terror in their voices. Patrick's legs shook, and he swallowed down the bile in his throat. "Are you hurt?" Patrick startled as he recognized the dark-haired man's voice. He gave a weak shake of his head. A hand clamped on his shoulder. "Then come with us." His eyes adjusted to the darkness, the forms of people keeping pace with them, slightly paler than the shadows beneath the thin light of the half-moon. They halted behind a hut where a fire, mostly embers this time of night, glowed, like dragon's eyes. Something prickled down Patrick's spine, and he jumped as someone bumped against him. A couple of men fed the fire from a nearby stack of wood, and the pulsing glow soon became a roaring fire. To his discomfort, Patrick noticed many faces turned to him. Angry mutterings rippled through the air. "You didn't fall to the ground when the dragon came," one man noted. "Do ye not fear them?" Patrick swallowed hard. "I can't say I've ever seen one before." "Lad, you didn't have to have seen something to fear it." Silence, but for a low whisper of voices, filled the night. Finally, another spoke to him. "We must destroy it, the dragon and its witch. It has caused much harm, and we can't allow it to prey upon us any longer. We need a champion. What say ye? Patrick quenched a short bleat of laughter. "'Tis not my battle to fight. I cannae protect them from a dragon or a witch. Why me?" He glanced at the faces made ruddy by the campfire's flames, their black eyes fastened expectantly on him. He felt the pull like tenterhooks set in his flesh. "I'm nae hero. I cannae defeat a dragon." The faces turned away, and disappointment descended on Patrick. Someone shoved a warm mug into his hand. "Here, drink this." Night air bit Laila's skin like a mantle of ice. She shivered, gripping the dorsal ridge before her to keep from sliding. Ormarr angled his flight to descend behind the island's peak, adjusting abruptly as though a draught caught his wings. Laila knew better. She'd seen the injury he'd sustained only hours earlier. She cursed the need to call on him for assistance.
Can we not simply live in peace? Why is different so terrible?
She stroked the muscular neck fondly, the scales smooth and faintly warm beneath her hand. With belly dropping speed, Ormarr landed on the beach, small pebbles crunching beneath his feet as he stumbled to a halt. Laila dismounted quickly, one hand skimming the dragon's hide as she inspected his injury, using touch more than sight in the dim light. She came to a stuttering stop as her fingers slipped into the deep gash in the otherwise pristine hide. Blood ran warm over her hand. Ormarr flinched. She scolded softly.
This wound is deeper than you told me.
His frame twitched, then wrenched violently. Laila stumbled back with a cry.
Dinna do this. You'll heal faster as a dragon.
"I cannae let them feed me like this." Ormarr gasped two worded phrases as his body changed brutally from dragon form to man. Change complete, he fell to the ground, leaning back against the ancient rock of the natural cavern. "Go," he rasped. "If you leave now, you can outrun them." Tears flowed down Laila's cheeks.
I'm not that fast.
She choked, torn between the sensible act of fleeing the mob who sought her death and protecting the one who'd likely given his life to save her. Blood surged to the surface of the gash beneath Ormarr's arm, black and shiny in the moonlight. It spilled in thick drops to the ground, staining the pebbles and sand. Laila slipped off her cloak and dragged it around Ormarr's shoulders, fastening the strings at the neck. Ormarr sighed. "I'll distract them." Using his good arm, he shoved away from his seat on the ground, stumbling and growling beneath his breath as his legs barely held him upright. Laila planted her fists at her waist.
Will you be hiding or distracting? From the looks of you, you only last long either way.
"Dinna argue with me, lass," Ormarr grunted, the effort to stand almost more than he could bear if the gritted teeth and ashen skin were any indication. "I hav'nae lived this long to go down before those Dunga." He jutted his chin toward the far shore where the points of light winked in the night. He settled his amber gaze on her face. "It will nae take them long to gather their courage and weaponry and storm the island. I'll create a mist to make them wary, but ye must be far from here before they come." Laila's throat thickened.
Where will I go, Ormarr? My reputation will follow me, and a healer, no matter how skilled, cannae last long once labelled as a witch. I dinna wish to live my life alone, fleeing from one village to the next.
Ormarr winced and slid heavily back to the ground, hugging his arm tight against his side. Silver mist crept over their feet like a rising tide, dimming the glitter of moonlight on water. "Ye should never have befriended me, lass," As a wee bairn, no one paid heed to your wandering about. Now everyone wishes to know how you spend your time, and it has cost you dear. I should have tried harder to frighten you the first time we met. You always were a brave lass. Laila knelt at his side.
'Tis not that I dinna fear you. I saw something more important than fear. I saw someone in need of a friend.
Pulling a strip of cloth from the hem of her skirt, she bandaged his wound as best she could as he feebly resisted her help.
I wouldn't trade our friendship for anything, Ormarr. Not for the acceptance of my clan. Not for life itself.
A muffled shout boomed across the water, the sound of many voices raised in a chord. The mist glowed red and gold, glimmering in the rekindled blaze of many fires. The shout died to a rumble, but that did not lessen the savage power of the sound. Ormarr gripped Laila's wrist, stilling her movements. It begins. Chapter 8. Patrick sipped the spicy liquid in the mug, relishing the slide of warmth to his stomach. A faint tingle spread outward, pulsing heat and courage through his veins. Someone anonymous in the darkness refilled his mug, and he took another sip. A few men formed a group separate from the main crowd, speaking together in hushed tones, slashes of words that reached Patrick's ears with angry ferocity, but he didn't understand their meaning. He recognized, too, as the men he'd accompanied to the clearing. Looks passed in his direction from them, but the dark-haired man crossed his arms over his chest and stubbornly refused to join in whatever they discussed. After a few moments, the sandy-haired man broke from the cluster and stepped closer to Patrick. He settled a hand on Patrick's shoulder. "You arena one of us." His gaze roamed over Patrick's strange attire. For all that his clothes had become tattered and worn during his short time as a soldier, the cut of his jacket was clearly different from the tunics of the men around him, the cloth both finer and more vibrantly coloured, and the metal buttons, the three that remained, something only a wealthy man would own in this age. Panic raised Patrick's heartbeat a notch. "I dinna live here, aye." The man nodded. "I thought not, and travellers are rare in these parts. I'm called Harold." "I'm Patrick." Harold cast a look at his dark companion, but the man remained several feet away, his disapproval palpable. Tugging Patrick's arm, Harold increased the distance between them and the others by a few steps. "I've been very concerned for our Laila for quite some time. Her manner changed noticeably a few months ago, and 'tis my belief the dragon has charmed her." His look of sorrow tugged at Patrick's heart, overriding the shock of the dragon and Laila. Harold stared across the water, where the island's peak rose, partially hidden by thickening mist. "I dinna wish her harm, but she put the well-being of the monster over that of her people, and I fear our Laila is no longer the person I knew as a child." He faced Patrick, staring urgently into his eyes, a quick motion of his hand indicating the crowd. "This got out of hand tonight. If we go after her, enter the forbidden cavern, men will die, for none among us know its secrets. If we remain here, the dragon will continue to prey upon our clan, and women and children will die also. He takes from us what he chooses, leaving us with little to feed ourselves over the long winter. Our people cannot continue to exist to only serve the beast. We've been ruled by the dragon for too long. 'Tis past time to put an end to his terrible reign. It's time to regain our freedom." Patrick blinked at the fervency of Harold's speech, recalled a similar one which had warmed his heart with patriotism. The English have ravaged more than our land. They take what isn't theirs, leaving us with no authority, no pride, no freedom. Our women are raped, children left fatherless, homeless. Fight with us and earn our land back. Fight and regain your pride. Fight for Prince Charlie, for freedom. Long ago, words sighed ghost-like through Patrick's memory. Remembered warmth of the inside of the pub replaced the cold night air and raging bonfire. Smells he'd all but forgotten surged through his nostrils. Peat, whisky, Mistress O'Donnell's lamb stew, and her sweet raspberry pasties. Voices long silenced rang in his heart, clogged his throat with tears. Were you proud of me, Da? Did you know I was afraid? Deep in my heart, where I hoped it wouldn't show. I was afraid of the blood and pain and the certainty of death, but I had to do it. I had a chance to make a difference. Did you understand? Is this another chance to make a difference? Am I to help rid them of this beastly tyrant? But who is the tyrant? The dragon or Harold? As though awakening from a deep sleep, Patrick drew a shuddering breath, dragging his focus to Harold. Laila, doesn't he need these men chasing her? Witch or nay, I will nae allow them to harm her. A tiny glow of hope glimmered. Perhaps he could change her fate. How can I help? The rumble of drums echoed beneath their feet, more sensation than sound. Laila hid the quake of her limbs as she turned briskly to Ormarr.
Hide yourself inside, old man. 'Twill take them longer to find us deep in the heart of the mountain.
Ormarr grunted as he lumbered unsteadily to his feet. Do you think they'll be put off by the maze yet again? I fear we've gone too far this time, lass. Laila shoved her shoulder beneath his uninjured arm, bracing herself against his weight, solidly muscled despite his age. She helped him stand, then waited as he gained his balance. Determined, she guided his steps toward the opening to the cavern, its black mouth a grim slash against the lighter rock.
They're useless fools, as you pointed out a moment ago. Scarcely brave except in a group.
She paused, helping him navigate around boulders that littered the area just inside the cave. She grunted, turning sideways as the passage narrowed to a path barely wide enough for the two of them to pass.
They can't enter the forbidden cave excepting a few at a time, and the corridors are very confusing. Mayhap they'll tire of their chase quickly and return home to complain and argue, as they have in the past.
She splashed through a puddle of water, chilling her feet.
'Tis wet and cold in here also, and dark and dangerous, even if I know where the holes are.
Ormarr snorted. Should I be encouraged to imagine these hardships will turn the rascals back? Why should I take offence at the aspersions ye cast on my home? Laila's chuckle ended in a gasp as Ormarr stumbled, nearly sending them both to the ground. I'm sorry, lass. You shouldn't waste your life helping me. 'Tis for naught, as you're well aware. Even if I survive this wound, which I tend to think is unlikely, the world has changed, and dragons such as I are no longer tolerated. He tried to halt, swaying as he propped a forearm against the stone wall, but Laila forced him to keep moving.
Do not consider stopping, Ormarr.
She gritted her teeth against frustration, anger and grief.
I will not leave you to the merciless men who pursue you.
Us, he corrected gently. They pursue us. Step after painful step, Laila urged him relentlessly on, ignoring the Stygian darkness, trusting her memory to keep them on the right path, and away from the fissures in the floor whose depths she didn't care to plumb.
Left, then immediately right.
Ormarr didn't gainsay her path, but he had ceased bantering with her several turns ago. Their harsh breaths echoed off the damp walls like the rasp of sand beneath the heel of a boot. Suddenly, the closeness of the corridors opened into a grand cavern, the walls falling away as if by magic. Even in the dark, Laila sensed the openness as the ceiling sprang upward to vaulted glory. One hand outstretched, she groped for the low, natural stone shelf that was Ormarr's sleeping space. Tucked to one side of a dazzling display of stalagmites, it needed only velvet hangings and coverings to rival the bed of a king. Her fingers encountered the plain woolen blanket Ormarr preferred. The pattern faded almost beyond recall. She shook it open, then lowered Ormarr to the bed, pulling the soft wool over him. Satisfied he was comfortable, she quickly moved to the side of the room, tapping the wall lightly with her fingertips to guide her way as she searched for a torch. She grabbed a brand from its iron holder and returned to Ormarr's side, the glow of his golden eyes in the dark marking her destination. Something rustled beneath her foot with a metallic shuffle, and she stumbled, twisting her ankle. Recovering quickly, she knelt next to Ormarr.
I didn't suppose you have a flint?
His grumbled answer was not exactly a laugh, but the lack of fire with a dragon present was a bit peculiar. Knowing Ormarr was beyond summoning the magic of fire, she dug in the small cloth bag at her waist, which miraculously had survived the stramash earlier. Cold to the point of numbness, her nearly nerveless fingers grasped the tiny piece of stone and metal and struck them together. A tiny spark sprang from the steel to the torch, but immediately died. Laila bit back frustration as her second attempt fared no better. A faint giggle tinkled in the cold air, and she jerked her head up. Wee specks of light danced high in the air like motes of dust in sunlight, blinking in and out in the darkness. She leaned forward and whispered in Ormarr's ear.
You summoned the pixies?
Ormarr grunted, a faint push of sound. I've no need to summon them. They've come because what you do interests them. Laila sank back on her heels with an exaggerated sigh and raised her voice.
'Tis a shame they didn't know how to light a torch.
She laid her palm on Ormarr's shoulder to still any words of correction. The tiny giggle sounded again. Several motes of light drifted together, tiny wings and bodies becoming more distinct as their light grew. Laila held her breath and struck the steel once more, indicating with a shrug how powerless she thought they were. Whoosh! Suddenly, a mass of pixies too numerous to count pounced on the end of the torch, setting it ablaze. Their twitters took on a faintly angry tone, and Laila hoped no wings had been singed in their act of defiance. She bit back a smile, too happy with the sudden glow and heat to heed the staccato chirps scolding her for her trickery. After a moment, their ire spent, the tiny winged fairies darted away. Pinpricks of light soared overhead in the cavern. Laila slid the back of her hand over Ormarr's cheek.
You should rest. You must regain your strength.
I've none left, lass. Choose what you can from the lair and disappear from this place. My wish is to know you're safe. She drew a breath to overcome the quiver in her voice.
I will not argue with you. There may still be time for you to heal enough to escape.
Tears blurred her eyes, and she bit her lip to keep back the sobs that threatened to choke her. It doesn't matter. Ormarr sighed as the chatter of the pixies grew louder. Laila glanced up, wondering what distressed them. In a panic, her gaze darted back to Ormarr's face, but even in the flickering torchlight, she could see he still lived. She breathed a sigh of relief.
What has disturbed them?
Ormarr's stare slid to the doorway. Chapter 9. I'm the only one who can save Laila. I'm not afraid of the dragon. The words took up a chant in Patrick's head in an effort to steady the quake in his legs as he stepped from the gently rocking boat onto the pebbled shore. One of the two men accompanying him shoved a lit torch in his direction, and Patrick grabbed it. The man quickly regained his seat as the other pushed the oars against a rock, propelling them away from the beach, leaving Patrick to find his courage, alone. The words to call them back were on the tip of his tongue, but his voice didn't work, and the men and boat were quickly lost in the heavy mist that roiled over the water and deadened the slap of waves on the rocks. Fear slid in an icy wave up his spine as he faced the enormous rock that was the centerpiece of the forbidden isle. Mist absorbed the golden glow of his torch, stealing its power, shutting out the rays of the dawning sun. Even with limited sight, he was terrified. Things live here, things I didn't care to know about. He took a step back, then halted, a curious revelation blooming in his mind. I am one of those things. I am a ghost. He'd already died. His agreement with Soni, the 79's wee witch, would end in little more than a day. Unless Soni had sent him up to fail, all he had to do was provide the courage to defy Harold and save Laila. Surely Soni would do the rest. Reassured, Patrick made his way cautiously over the pebbles, skirting the large rocks that regularly birthed smaller stones and shards during the fierce midwinter storms. Bitter wind flailed at his back, driving him forward, head bent, toward the cavern's opening. His torch flickered. The damp wind threatened to douse the blaze and Patrick's newly won confidence. With scarcely a pause to reconsider his options, he entered the cave. His senses vanished. The keening wind fell as abruptly as if he'd closed a door. The torch fluttered, caught between burn and fizzle. Dampness clogged his nostrils, replacing the bracing scent of salt air with something dull and murky. Patrick hesitated, his eyes growing accustomed to the light beaming reluctantly from the torch. Water glistened on the dark stone walls all about him, flashing the torch's glow back in a confusing manner. His ears picked up the faint hum of the wind outside, and he heard the slow drip of mist as it collected on the ceiling and fell a drop at a time to the floor. Senses restored, Patrick drew a determined breath and advanced deeper into the cave, scanning the walls for something familiar, something to tell him which direction to turn. He hadn't paid a lot of attention as he'd followed Laila from the cave earlier, but the island didn't appear to be so very large. How hard could it be to find Laila and a dragon in such a place? Puddles glistening as black as a moonless night dotted the floor of the passage. Patrick edged cautiously around one, only to slip into another. His leg plunged knee-deep into the hole before he realized 'twas no puddle, but a deep fissure with no bottom he could see. His shocked gasp thudded woodenly in the narrow confines of the corridor, emphasizing the closeness of what was little more than a tunnel barely large enough to allow him to stand upright. How does a dragon fit through here? Surprised to find he hadn't dropped his torch when he stumbled, he slowly waved the light about, seeking additional height or width to the passage. But the stone scarcely cleared his head and narrowly missed grazing the span of his shoulders. With a dissatisfied shrug, he trudged ahead. If there is a sheen, 'tis likely a puddle, though no guarantee its depth. No sheen means no water, only a hole. Eyes down, he studied the slippery path ahead. A sigh of air told him he'd reached a cross point. He stared into the darkness, willing himself to remember if he should turn here or not, but there was naught to indicate if the new passage was the correct one. The black walls were the same. Water dripped from the ceiling over Patrick's head. There was no gaping hole in the floor to keep him from taking that path. The decision was his alone. Defeat tugged at Patrick's shoulders. I cannae go back. Harold would only send someone else. Yet I cannae go ahead. I could be wandering inside this rock for years, or until Soni comes for me. I will be the only ghost returned to the Moor. Everyone will know I've failed. Perhaps Soni can't find me here. Such faint hope only deepened Patrick's frustration. Clearly, he was not a hero. Not in 1746 on Culloden Moor, where the hopes of the Jacobites were dashed beyond recall, and not now, centuries earlier, where he'd been given a second chance. The grip on his torch wavered. Smoke twisted upward as a drop of water sizzled on the charred end of the stick. Patrick glanced about. New worry that the damp would extinguish his torch, leaving him stranded in the dark, overrode his morose thoughts. Sparks from the torch died quickly in the dank air, but others floated just ahead. Floated. Puzzled, Patrick tiptoed silently forward, gaze intent on the curious behaviour of the wee lights. They lingered just out of reach, taunting him, leading him deeper into the cave. A tinkle of sound caused him to peer harder at the sparks, but their movement defeated his eyesight. What are they? They reached another turn, another intersection, and the dancing lights did not hesitate as they flitted around the corners. Patrick hurried to keep up, winding his way through a maze of corridors, following the lights, pushing back the thought that he'd never find his way out again. He was a ghost, and Soni would come for him soon. He skirted a large rock, barking his shin painfully against a jagged edge. Stumbling, he glanced up to see the tiny specks of light hover at what appeared to be another opening. Taking a breath to slow his racing heartbeat, he advanced a slow step at a time, torch held high. Dinna fash, wee ones, I will nae hurt ye. I wish to know what ye are. He kept his voice soft, hoping to not send the sparks scattering once again. A chime-like noise reached his ears, as though the wee lights urged him on, or scolded him. Wonderment stole over him as he approached. Tiny wings, sheer yet gold in the glow of his torch, beat the air, attached to perfectly formed bodies, small enough to sit upon the awl he'd once used to punch holes in shoe leather. As a group, the wee ones pointed inside the room, darting over his head, half shooing, half leading him inside. With a gentle laugh at their antics, Patrick stepped over the threshold and stopped dead in his tracks. Saints preserve me, 'tis true. Laila stared at the man in the doorway.
Patrick?
She climbed to her feet. Golden light spilled over the room, accented by the sparkling pixies engaged in intricate flight patterns high above their heads. She placed the torch in its bracket, then brushed her hands on her skirt. Patrick did not reply, nor did he glance her way. Eyes wide with wonderment, he stepped deeper into the room, then paused, turning in a slow circle as he surveyed the chamber. What is this place? Laila frowned, somewhat annoyed with his awestruck voice.
Ormar's lair. Have you never been in a dragon's den before?
He must have missed her sarcasm, for he didn't flinch. Nay, I've heard tales, but this is fantastic. Laila shrugged, casting her gaze over the countless piles of gold, silver, and jewels. Though she knew their touch to be cold, they glowed with warm invitation beneath the torchlight. Fairy light twinkled off the faceted surfaces, beckoning Patrick to partake in their greed and avarice. He finally turned his attention, at least half of it, to Laila. Does the clan know about this? She rolled her eyes.
Do you think a mere dragon would keep them away if they did?
At the mention of the dragon, Patrick startled. Where is he? Are we safe? Laila hedged, knowing he would soon see Ormarr, but hoping to give the dragon a bit more time.
Safe enough. Why are you here?
Patrick dropped his gaze. I was sent to kill ye. Chapter 10. Wonderment and awe of the cave's treasures vanished beneath the harsh reality of his mission. Muscles tensed across Patrick's shoulders, and he ignored the twitterings from the pixies as he focused on Laila's shocked face. Her beautiful eyes stared at him, wide and fathomless as the ocean.
Why? Why did they send you?
I'm the only one they know who has been in the caverns and returned. I came so others wouldn't.
You can kill me?
Laila's brows slanted mockingly, her voice dropping with skepticism.
Are you certain?
Patrick startled again. Oh no, I'm here to help you escape. He canted his head toward the door. They think I'll kill the dragon and bring ye back so justice may be done, he replied, repeating Harold's words of reassurance, rob the distastefulness from the job he required of Patrick.
Justice?
Her voice slid scathingly through the air.
Who sold you that pack of lies? My guess is 'twas Harold. He's the leader of the group. His idea of justice is to destroy what he fears.
Her eyes flashed.
He fears me.
Patrick cast a look about the cavern beyond the twinkling treasure. Where's the dragon? Here. Patrick's head snapped around at the very human-sounding voice to his right. A man who could have been mid-aged or ancient leaned against a stalagmite that stretched upward into the darkness. Obviously injured, he held his arm tucked close to his side, and his stance was none too steady. Do I surprise ye? The man drawled, his voice amused. But there was no humour in the hard, glittering eyes or the thin, pressed lips. Realizing he stared open-mouthed, Patrick shut his jaw with a click and squared his shoulders, marshalling his wits. You didn't look much like a dragon. The man shrugged. Nevertheless, I assure ye, I am Ormarr the dragon, or Ormarr the Terrible, to depend upon who you've heard telling me. Patrick's gaze swept to Laila. She gave a solemn nod.
Aye, he's the dragon the people fear.
But I saw him. The dragon, it had wings. Huge. Patrick's voice trailed off, terribly confused. I'm a shifter, lad. A dragon who can take human form. Laila placed a palm gently on Patrick's arm.
He isn't as terrible as Harold told you.
Patrick blinked. This was beyond his imagination. A dragon which was also human.
Everything will be fine, Patrick. The lads are over-eager to place blame for the winter shortages ahead and follow Harold's ravings. I'll return home in a day or two, and all will be as before.
Laila's soft eyes encouraged him to believe her, trust her. Such a lovely lass. Her da. His eyes widened with dismay as he recalled the man cutting his daughter loose to her fate, her terrible fate. Patrick stepped closer, drawing their attention, sorrow filling his heart for his next words. I asked your da if he wouldn't speak on behalf of his daughter. He told me you must live with your decisions. You can't go home. He shifted his gaze to Ormarr. How could he give up on his own daughter to a witch hunt? Laila bristled.
My da.
Ormarr spoke firmly over Laila's heated words. Eric, isn't he your da? Laila stared at Ormarr, ignoring Patrick's question.
What do you mean, Ormarr? He and my ma.
Omar gave a dismissive shake of his head. Aye, he married your ma, only weeks before you were born. Eric had his heart set on becoming the clan's leader after your granda passed. Marrying your ma was the easiest way, and he didn't care if it meant raising ye as his own or not. Omar sighed. At least I thought he didn't mind. Laila approached the old dragon, concern for her friend evident in her gentle movements. She placed the back of her hand on his cheek. He snorted and shied away. I didn't have a fever, lass. I know who your da is. Something light akin to hope fluttered in Laila's heart.
Will you tell me?
Omar leaned closer and pressed his forehead against hers. Ye are my daughter, Laila, my beautiful child of the night. Suddenly it made sense.
Da, Eric had few kind words for me. I always thought he wished I'd been born a lad. But he treats everyone with arrogance and disrespect. Despite his lofty goals, he's a man who should have been employed at more menial tasks, not one needing brain power and a sense of responsibility.
Omar chided Laila as he straightened. Ye shouldn't speak so of Eric. He has managed to keep the clan safe and fed these past years. A small smile crossed his face, though the absence of Vikings has been more by my hand than his. He canted his head to one side, eyes gazing tenderly at Laila. Your ma and I loved each other, but I couldn't give her a home, and 'twas nae possible to raise a family in a cave with a dragon for a da. 'Twas a difficult decision she made, and I promised to stay away, hoping to make things easier for her. I returned for a glimpse of ye when she died. Ye were only 6 summers old, and had my heart from that moment on. I'm happy to give my life for ye now. He tucked a stray curl behind her ear. Ye know 'tis what will happen. As injured as I am, I cannae defend myself for long once I defeat the maze, and ye will leave me behind. I can help ye much more from here. I would only slow ye down if I left with ye, and then would both be caught. Sudden tears blinded her, tears for the gift of knowledge and her true identity, tears for the pain she knew Ormarr felt, both in his body and in his heart, tears for the truth tearing her apart. Ormarr would die today. A lump rose in Patrick's throat. He stretched a hand toward Laila, wanting to distract her before her pain claimed his heart. Laila. Her name wafted from his mouth, tasting of beauty and promise. She lifted her head, brushing tears from her cheeks. Will you allow me to help you? The right corner of her lips quirked to the side, but she didn't quite manage a smile.
For too long they have blamed the dragon for things he hasn't done. Yet he's been my friend for many years.
She gazed at Ormarr, a combination of deep satisfaction and compassion in her eyes.
Though he hunts far from here for his meals, what sense would it make to despoil his own land, and takes care none see him now? They remember the old legends, and the mists rising from the Forbidden Isle help ensure none dare enter the caves.
But why would they seek to name ye a witch? This time the smile came gently to her face.
There's such honesty in you, Patrick. You're full of kindness and see nae reason others should lie and cheat. Harold has wished to marry me since I was a child, likely coveting the leader's position as my da Eric once did. But I've refused him, and a couple of years ago did so in such a manner that called into question his honour and intentions. 'Twas not well done of me, and Harold took it hard.
I considered burning Harold's house to ashes, Ormarr rumbled, sounding more like a dragon than a man. 'Tis too late now. Patrick squeaked. You would have killed him. Ormarr grumbled and pushed away from the stalagmite. His form wavered, his outline blurring. Laila gasped. Ormarr grunted and waved away her concern. Harold learned the truth of the dragon yester eve. Patrick stared, mouth agape, as Ormarr cupped a hand over his wound. What happened to ye? Laila sighed.
I come often to the Forbidden Isle, seeking herbs and time to visit with Ormarr. Harold followed me. I can guess he planned threats instead of persuasion, for he was armed with a sword. As he approached me, Ormarr the dragon swooped down, driving him away. Though clearly astonished, Harold drew his sword and plunged it beneath Ormar's wing.
Ormarr snarled. Damn cur, I underestimated him. Something I haven't done with a human in many long years.
Harold has said uncomplimentary things about me before, even veiled suggestions of witchcraft if a patient recovered from a particularly injurious wound or sickness. But this time his intent was real. He swore he'd see me burn for a witch, and Ormarr dispatched as well.
Patrick watched the viscous black fluid drop ominously from Ormarr's side to the glistening floor. The puddle nodding at his feet bespoke the fate before him. Even I, a shoemaker, know ye are sorely injured. Is it true ye are the cruel beast Harold had claimed? In the beginning of time, not long after I hatched, I earned the name Ormarr the Terrible for good reason. I was bigger, stronger, faster and more dangerous than any mere human. I disdained that which could not threaten me. There was nae compassion in me, and I ruled as I chose. It took a few centuries to learn nurturing over destruction, honour over pride, but there is none alive today who remembers the reality of my predations.
And none who remember Vikings beyond the terrible legends, thanks to Ormarr. He's kept them from our shores for nearly 60 years.
Ormarr's eyes flashed. Look, their ships supplied the wealth ye see before ye, and the hunt was enjoyable, he added, a flash of happy memory in his eyes. Patrick drew a deep breath. I believe you both, but if we dinna hurry, Harold will send someone in my place. If we stay here, we're trapped.
Aye, but Ormarr can't carry us away. If he shifts, he may be able to heal. But rescuing me from the crowd cost him dearly, and I dinna think he has the strength to change again.
Her face full of devastation, she placed a hand gently on Ormarr's shoulder. I've lost too much blood, daughter. Ormarr smiled broadly. I've wished to name ye daughter for many years. It does my heart good to say it now. Patrick's heart filled to overflowing. If I'd lived, I would have searched the whole world for a lass as brave and curran as Laila. Clearing the lump in his throat of all the things that could never be, he summoned their attention. I'll think of a plan. Chapter 11. Laila didn't take more than a moment or two to consider Patrick's sincerity. On the one hand, time was critical, and if someone had a plan for them to escape the fire, even her deeply ingrained sense of caution wouldn't stand in her way. On the other hand, something in her heart told her Patrick was entirely trustworthy. She could feel the strength of his desire to do everything in his power to right wrongs and protect those who could not help themselves.
I never knew there were men like you, Patrick. Your kindness and strength of character will be the way I measure all others. What a shame you're a ghost.
She steadied her heart.
Tell me your plan.
They helped Ormarr finish dressing, warm clothing to stave off the chill in the cave for as long as possible. It touched Laila that Patrick had wanted to take Ormarr with them, but the old dragon remained stubborn, and in the end they had agreed to leave him behind. Ormarr shooed them with a wave. Go, away with both of ye. His dark amber gaze froze Patrick in his tracks. Protect her. Take her far from here, and see to it she never has to worry about men like Harold and his ilk again. How can I? I'm a... Laila jabbed her elbow into his side, halting his words.
We'll be fine, Ormarr.
Her eyes blurred. It hurt unbearably to leave him alone.
How will we know? This is goodbye, isn't it?
She dropped to her knees on the cold stone and folded herself gently against Ormarr, careful not to jar his arm. But his muscles tightened, and he sucked in a sudden breath at her touch. Laila scrambled to her feet.
I'm sorry, Ormarr. I wish things could be different.
Her eyes met his, reading the wealth of sorrow in the warm, golden depths. As do I, lass. I left you once so you could have a better life. I wasn't certain it was the right thing to do. He gave a nod to Patrick. This time, I am. She wouldn't tell Ormarr the truth. 'Twas better he did not know there was no future for herself and Patrick, even had she desired it. Did she? She hazarded a quick glance at the man beside her. Built with long, lean lines, his muscles were gentle and trim. His face was rather plain, but his smile lit his beautiful eyes and cast a brilliance to his features that went straight to her heart. And she already knew what his heart was like. Contentment of a gentle summer rain, purity of fresh fallen snow, simplicity and kindness and loyalty, and he was a ghost. Patrick jerked as Laila's elbow made painful contact with his ribs. He narrowed his gaze at hers, trying to discover if she'd done it a purpose, to keep him from telling Ormarr he was a ghost. She didn't glance at him, but moved to Ormarr's side as they said their goodbyes. Patrick sniffed, then jammed his hands into his coat pockets, embarrassed by the sudden sting of tears. We should go, Laila. The longer we wait, the more likely we'll meet with Harold or his men.
Aye, 'twill take time to screw their courage to coming here. But Harold doesn't like to lose, and he lost rather spectacularly last night.
She reached into the small section of clothing Ormarr kept in a wooden chest and retrieved a heavy cloak. She drew it over her shoulders and faced her father one last time.
Thank you for everything. I hope to be like you one day.
You have my strength, but you will not have my sheep, daughter. Ye are fully human. Laila's laugh was more of a sigh.
I wish to have your sense of honour, the wisdom you have shared with me. I will always remember the laughter, father.
She hazarded a twisted smile.
'Tis a relief to know I will nae sprout wings and fly.
Ormarr inhaled, prelude to his words, but sighed heavily, apparently discarding what he'd intended to say. He waved a hand over the room. Take a few pieces of the hoard with ye, something which can be traded for food and supplies. It seemed a good idea, so Patrick glanced about, spurning the goblets and vases for a few handfuls of gold coins that weighed heavily in his pockets. A clear crystal, shaped roughly like a heart, hung from a delicate gold chain, and he placed it in a pocket too. Patrick caught Laila's hand in his, and she squeezed it hard. With a nod to Ormarr, she allowed Patrick to lead her through the door with one last glance over her shoulder. Patrick peeked too at Ormarr, the pixie lights twinkling like stars above his head, and torchlight glowing fiercely red in the windowless room. A dragon in human form, aged and injured, and the glimmer of death in his eyes. The coins in Patrick's pockets jingled as they hurried through the dark corridors. Laila's knowledge of the maze and its hazards allowed them to move at a brisk pace. Still, the speed did not suit him. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled, and the need to be out of the cave nipped aggressively at his heels. Hurry! He gave Laila's elbow a nudge.
I'm trying.
At the next corner, she stumbled to a stop.
There's something in my eye.
She drew her sleeve across her face. You mustn't stop. Patrick felt rattled. Pixie lights swooped about his head, too fast to focus on. He swatted at them in irritation. I didn't know what they are, but they're a menace.
Aye, but they led you in, did they not?
How did ye know? She shook her head.
One trip through the maze doesn't make you a competent dragon hunter, especially since you'd no idea you would be back.
She paused.
And I saw them join the flock in Ormar's lair.
Tiny lights flew in Patrick's face, driving him back a step. Come, Laila, we can't linger. Already their surroundings had taken on a decidedly greyish hue, indicating not only were they near the mouth of the cave, but it was no longer night. We must hurry. Too much time has passed, and we must get out of the cave. Patrick brushed aside the twittering pixies and strode forward, peering eagerly into the semi-dark passageway. Laila followed, her torch causing the deep shadows to flee as they passed. After another turn and a crack to Patrick's head as he failed to judge the upper limits of the doorway, they arrived in the rock-strewn area at the cavern's opening. Pixie lights vanished. Lights sparkled on the wet stone and twinkled in tiny faceted stones buried in exposed veins in the wall. The portal shone white in the force of the morning sun, which had at last banished the mists, and Patrick held a forearm above his eyes as they grew accustomed to the light. The air freshened as it circulated more freely near the entrance, unlike in Ormarr's lair, where neither breeze nor sunlight purged it of the stale odours of centuries.
Where is your boat, Patrick? My craft is on the mainland.
There isn't a hidden boat about. We're truly cut off. He had not wanted to use his second plan. Then we must surprise Harold's men as they return for me. We will strike out for open water and come ashore far from here. Laila stared at him askance, one brow arched impossibly high.
They dropped you here, and you think to take Harold and his men by surprise? 'Tis nae much of a plan.
Patrick's lips tightened. We cannae swim the strait, and it appears we cannae fly. If there's nae boat hidden away nearby, we didn't have another choice. He motioned for her to precede him from the cave. With a heavy sigh and a toss of her head, Laila doused her torch in a convenient puddle and stashed it in a metal bracket near the door. She stepped through the entrance, ducking slightly. Patrick followed, squinting against the full force of the sun. Laila's gasp and a solid thunk against his chest took Patrick by surprise. Instinctively, he spread his arms to either side, catching her before she could slip back inside the cave. Ugh, what's the problem, Laila? She turned, facing the small group of men who stood several feet away, flanking a fair-haired man. His malevolent grin sent icy water through Patrick's veins. Harold gave a nod of satisfaction. Just as we planned, my friend. You've done your part well. He took a few steps closer. Is the dragon dead? What do you mean? Patrick stuttered. What plan? Why, to bring fair Laila out of the dragon's cave so we can escort her to the village. Harold cast a dark look at the healer. Where she'll be burned as a witch. He motioned his men forward. Laila stumbled back a step, but Patrick was too stunned to move out of her way. She fell against him, then jerked away, her eyes flashing angry fire. This
was your plan? And I trusted you?
Her words cut Patrick to the quick. She thought he betrayed her. I thought 'twould be easy. Easy to elude Harold's men, easy to overpower them and steal their boat. He shook his head at the foolishness of his plan. It would not have been easy. Laila's accusing glare punished him. He gave her an unhappy look. I didn't mean for this to happen. Furious, she shoved against his chest. Caught off guard, he lurched to the side, coins jingling merrily in his pocket. A handful of gold spilled to the ground, winking in the sun. Harold started forward, eyes wide. "So 'tis true. There's a dragon horde in the cave." He turned to his men. "Hunt, the dragon's there." Chapter 12. "Wait!" Patrick bent to retrieve his spilt coins, then straightened as Harold's men shoved Laila into their boat. Leaving her stranded in the rocking craft, the men brushed past Harold and Patrick, advancing on the black opening to the cave. Small, golden lights zipped from inside, bursting into white sparks as they met the sunlight. They swooped and dove about the men's heads. Waving their hands and swords in the air, the men warded off the tiny pixies. One of Harold's men shrank back, fear in his eyes as he ducked beneath the pixie swarm. "'Tis bewitched!" His wide eyes slid to Laila. "Witch!" The men paused at the doorway, uncertain gazes seeking Harold's instruction. "'Tis gold to be had, treasure for those brave enough." Harold's gaze hardened on Patrick. "He'll lead ye." Alarmed, Patrick took a step back. "I dinna know the way." Harold's angry gaze bored into Patrick. "You've been in and out of the maze twice. You'll do so again." 2 strides saw Harold alongside the boat. His arm snaked about Laila's waist, pinning her against his side. "Or I will ensure our witch never sees the fires that burn her." A dagger appeared in his hand, too fast for either Patrick or Laila to react. The point winked at the corner of Laila's eyes, a hair's breadth from slicing into the sparkling orbs. Laila gasped. "What will it be, my brave dragon slayer?" Harold mocked. "You'll receive your share of the treasure." His gaze slid to Laila. "Or I can make things very unpleasant for our witch." Patrick protested, certain in his heart that Laila was neither a witch nor a liar. "She isna a witch." His muscles twitched with the inability to rescue Laila, or perhaps with the impulse to flee. How could he fight with so many against him? "Will I never be brave? It takes bravery to fight the urge to flee." Patrick caught the memory of Laila's words as a sigh through his mind, encouraging, reassuring, even when he knew it would be easier to go along with Harold's demands, to accept his role as part of the crowd. Her gaze met his, her head unbowed, though he knew she feared what would happen if he led them to Ormarr. A link, tangible as a caress, flowed between them. She trusted him to do the right thing. But what was the right thing? She blinked once, then slid her gaze to the mountain, the ancient stone formidable in the glare of the sun. Did he go and lead the men to Ormarr, or refuse and risk Laila's almost certain torture and death? Patrick cleared his throat, his eyes firm on Laila as he spoke to Harold. "Will ye pledge no harm to her if I'll lead your men to the dragon's lair? Will ye exchange her life for the gold?" Harold looked thoughtful. "If ye return with the gold, I will give her to ye." Patrick sent a sharp look to Harold. "Alive?" With the grin of a man caught in a word game, Harold flourished his blade in the air. "Of course." Patrick nodded once and took a step toward the cave. He checked, seeking a last reassurance. Unharmed. With a sigh, Harold glanced inside the small boat. "She has wet feet, and the hem of her gown appears the worse for wear, but I will nae harm her further." Patrick inhaled slowly, deeply, searching Harold's words for hidden lies. Laila gasped as Harold shoved her roughly to the wooden seat in the boat. "But I neither will allow her to escape." The absolute darkness of the windowless room did not hinder Ormarr's sight. His eyes glowed from within, causing the gold in the cavern to shimmer with an unearthly luminance. Here the walls did not drip with moisture, reflecting the treasure's glow, but tiny crystals in the stone sparkled like flightless pixies. He forced himself to relax, muscle by muscle, allowing healing power to flow through his veins. Not that he expected to last the night, but he would not meet his enemies defenceless, not if he could help it. "Bjork, 1,000 gold pieces from his ship, 100 years ago this summer, Geir and Ivar." His gaze travelled over the pile of jewel-studded goblets. "They ate well." A slight smile quirked the corner of his lips. "Almost as well as I did." Not since he became lord of the Forbidden Isle had Vikings invaded his land. His gaze lingered on the individual piles of his hoard, so precious to him centuries ago, now not more than a cold bed, soon to be taken from him. He closed his eyes, dismissing the gold as unimportant. Let his memory glide like silk over a woman's skin. His woman, Freydis, Laila's mother. Golden hair flashed silver white in the sun, tribute to her ancestors the Vikings who had raided the coastline for many years. Arms, slender and white, lifted as she danced on the shore, abandonment in her moves. The music in her head echoed in the graceful patterns of her feet. The hem of her gown lifting and falling in time to her dance. He would always remember her thus, captivating, young, exciting. He loved her with all the fierceness of his dragon's heart, unable to deny himself the taste of her, knowing they had no future together, knowing she would one day belong to another. But his decision had brought him Laila. So many stolen nights, bartered moments alone with Freydis, and she had given him a daughter, a young woman who because of him was accused of being a witch. Ormarr bestirred himself. This was intolerable. His trust in Patrick was to give Laila a loving home, but would the man die to defend her? What awaited them at the cave's entrance below? The wound in his side protested sharply as Ormarr rose to his feet. Bracing one hand against the stone wall, he forced himself upright as befitted a warrior. He flexed his arms, testing their strength. Power flowed over him, the smooth coolness of scales rippling just beneath his skin. Claws pressed against his fingertips, ready to extend. Spines rattled against his backbone, dorsal ridges on the verge of slipping through. He was a dragon. He would not die trapped in human form. Calling upon his true identity, he shifted, ignoring the pain as muscles adjusted along his lengthening bones. His neck arched upward. Glistening fangs appeared as his jaw jutted forward. His tail swished angrily, sending golden treasure tumbling across the room in discordant melody. Scales locked together as impenetrable as armour. The wound beneath his wing would take time to heal, and left him weakened on that side, but his heartbeat strengthened as his body walled off the sword wound that had violated his chest. Air banded tight in his lungs, and smoke slipped from his nostrils. With waddling, earth-bound grace, he stalked to the rear of the cavern. He wedged his bulk around a corner and down a corridor. Light made him blink as he approached the crest of the mountain, the upper entrance to his domain. A wide ledge opened before him, and he halted, surveying the beach far below with his dragon sight. Even at this distance, the sand glimmered, each grain sharply individual in the sun. To the west, a boat lay a length off the shore. Laila sat on its bench, rocking gently on the waves, but the man at her side was not Patrick. Ormarr's gaze narrowed. Harold rested one-booted foot on the top edge of the boat, his gaze on the cave opening. "Someone has entered the cave. Patrick." Ormarr sent his gaze skimming over both land and water, finding neither blood nor body to indicate Patrick's demise. He peered at Laila, warmth stealing over his heart. She shuddered, water lapping about her ankles. Harold fingered a long dagger, its blade winking wickedly. Harold slowly pivoted until he stared at Laila, his mocking voice trailing upward to Ormarr's sensitive ears. "Do you believe the lad will return to ye? He doesn't care for ye, not like I could." He edged closer. "I can make this all go away, Laila. I can protect ye from the charges of witchcraft. Only a nod from ye, and we can enjoy ourselves whilst we wait."
Never.
Harold's face hardened. "Never is a long time." Shaking his pinions loose with a dry rustle of sound, Ormarr dropped from the ledge. Chapter 13. A few feet inside the cave, the sunlight failed. Patrick halted. Harold's men formed stark shadows against the cavern's doorway. The smoky scent of Laila's doused torch met his nose. "We can go nae further without light." A curious mixture of relief, fear and determination stole over him, kicking his heartbeat to a faster pace. One of the shadows broke from the group, pacing menacingly forward. "Light the torch, Dragonslayer." Patrick trembled slightly. "Nay, 'tis wet and willna light." The apology slipped out before he could stop it. Irritated, he reached deep for the bravery inside him. He shoved the man aside. "Find your own light. I willna be part of this." A scream thudded dully past the rocks. Patrick jerked to attention. "Laila!" He sidestepped the three men who closed against him. A rush of wind roared past the doorway. Patrick pulled up short, one stride beyond the entrance. The sail of an enormous ship snapped in the air. Ship? Patrick raised his arm, protecting his face. The sail flapped past, then whooshed skyward. Not a sail, a dragon's wing. Cries of fear echoed in the cave behind him. Patrick ignored them, sending his gaze to the boat where Laila had sat. She was gone. Laila's skirt caught on a large splinter in the rim of the boat as she leapt over the side. Her legs tangled in the heavy fabric, and she fell face down in the cold, briny water. With a sputter she sat, her bottom on the rocks beneath the waves, chest deep in the water. Shaking her head to clear her sight, she saw Ormarr, splendid in his dragon form, swoop down from the sky, great claws extended. Harold stood, shocked, in his path. "Nay!" She scrambled to her feet, slipping again as her shoes lost traction against the wet stones. Lunging forward, she shoved Harold out of harm's way. Ormarr roared his displeasure, soaring upward against the sun. Laila faced him, hands fisted on her hips. She lifted her chin, ignoring the cold water weighting her dress, plastering the fabric to her with icy flattery.
"I only wish to leave here, Ormarr. I dinna wish Harold's blood on my hands. He isn't worth it."
Ormarr wheeled, dropping close to the waves, tracking for the beach. Harold's face darkened, an angry red flush staining his cheeks. "Beast! Hellspawn! I will kill ye this time!" Casting his dagger to the ground, he sprinted to meet the dragon, his sword rasping along its thick leather sheath as he drew it forth. He held it high above his head, both hands fisted on the hilt. Sunlight slid along the blade. Blinding, deadly, Laila stood transfixed, too far away to interfere with Ormarr's fate. A sharp crack ripped through the air. Laila ducked, spinning as she searched for the source of the noise. Patrick stood framed in the cavern's entrance, a thin stream of smoke spiralling upward from the black stick in his hands. Ormarr veered away, wobbling in the air, reminding Laila of his injury, and was quickly lost to sight. Harold's sword pitched from his hands as his body fell, landing face down on the beach. A wave raced ashore, lapping at his face for an instant before retreating into the sea. Patrick stumbled forward, unsteady legs betraying him, catching himself mid-stride as he ran to Harold's side, smoking pistol dangling from one hand. Blood seeped across the ground from a wound in Harold's shoulder. Patrick grasped the man by his uninjured side and rolled him over. "Harold." The man's eyes rolled back in his head, and he did not answer. Patrick's hands trembled as he probed the man's neck, seeking reassurance of life. Fleeting with the frantic flutter of a moth trapped inside cupped hands, Harold's blood pulsed against Patrick's fingers. Laila knelt beside him in a muted rustle of wet fabric.
What happened?
Patrick's gaze dropped to his side, his pistol warm in his hand. "I shot him." Laila's gaze followed his.
Shot? With your pistol?
Her brow arched, sceptical.
I thought you said you weren't a good shot.
"I was aiming for his sword," Patrick admitted. "I didn't want him to hurt Ormarr."
Ugh, you did make him drop his sword.
Laila gave Harold her attention as she ripped a length of cloth from his shirt. Folding it several times, she pressed it against his wound, then wrapped the remaining length about his shoulder, tying it in place. Patrick jammed his hands in his pockets. "The ball's still in there."
Ball? What do you mean?
"I shot him with a ball from a pistol. It's still in his shoulder and must be removed."
Where are his men?
Laila and Patrick looked to the cavern's opening, but the three henchmen were nowhere to be seen. She called to them.
Harold needs attention.
Her words hung in the air unchallenged.
You must take him ashore and see that he gets help.
Harold moaned softly. Laila peered at Patrick.
I can't help him here. You're certain it must come out?
Aye. Silence. Lost opportunity. Certain of their next action, uncertain of the outcome.
Can you do this? I've never removed a ball before.
Patrick shrugged. "I'm nae surgeon, but I've a fair hand at stitchery. I can assist ye." On an impulse Patrick didn't anticipate, Laila planted a soft kiss on his cheek. He touched his fingertips to the warm spot her lips left behind, eyes wide, questioning. Her eyes shone.
You're kind and brave. You know helping Harold will nae save us, and he isn't a good man. Yet you dinna shirk his need.
"My fear for ye, Laila, not me. I'm a ghost and will nae last beyond tomorrow. There isn't much that can do to me, nor can they change my fate." Sorrow bit deep into Patrick's heart. "Let me take him to the village alone. Ye can still escape." She placed her fingers over Patrick's, caressing his cheek.
My fate is here as well, and I have never had a ghostly assistant before.
"It will nae make the villagers like ye more." With a shake of his head for what was likely the seal of their fates, Patrick hefted Harold to his shoulder and carried him to the boat. Resisting the urge to toss the man into the ocean, he laid him across one of the bench seats. He took Laila's hand, balancing her as she stepped into the boat. They rowed across the Sound in silence, the slap of water against the wooden hull as rhythmic as a heartbeat. The gentle splash of the oars sped them on their way. They quickly reached the shore, greeted by a muttering crowd that had apparently not expected Harold to return in such a manner. Angry murmurs rose, mimicking a disturbed beehive, as Patrick lugged Harold from the boat. Furtive stares glanced off both him and Laila as they travelled the path to her home, uncertainty, fear and distrust trailing their steps. Laila held the door open for Patrick, motioning him to a cot in the corner of the room where he deposited Harold face down. Laila sighed, fingers busy as she sorted through her healer's tools. Setting the instruments on a clean strip of cloth, she placed them on a low table near the bed.
At least Eric isn't home, and mayhap the others will leave us alone long enough to help Harold. There should be hot water in the pot. Build up the fire and heat the water to boiling.
Grateful to have something helpful to do, Patrick grabbed a few sturdy sticks from the stack beside the hearth and fed the banked fire. Laila stepped to the other side of the hearth to rummage in a small chest. Pulling a gown from within, she turned her back to Patrick and lifted it over her head. Dropping her sodden dress from beneath as quickly as the dry one settled on her shoulders, she gave Patrick no time to be embarrassed. With a sigh of contentment at exchanging cold, wet clothes for dry, Laila rolled her shoulders, pulling the laces of her gown tight with practised ease. She hid her smile at Patrick's startled look.
I would have never done that before another. I couldn't endure the leers, the posturing, the knowledge of my simple, experiment act being gossiped about to others. Men.
She seated herself next to Harold and sliced his shirt away with a slim knife, exposing a neat round hole in his back.
But Patrick is gentle, unassuming, kind.
She tilted her head thoughtfully, her heart twisting to remember the dragon's awkward flight from the island.
Yet he stood up to 3 men, denied their demand to assist plundering Ormar's lair, and he protected me. Bring me a small bowl of water.
Using a clean piece of cloth, she wiped the blood away from the wound. Patrick drew a lead ball from his sporran. It looks like this. With a nod, Laila dragged her attention from the man beside her to the one sprawled on the cot. Harold's skin was pale, but not alarmingly so, and his breathing was shallow but regular. Taking a slender rod, she probed the wound. Harold stirred. The sensation of touching soft flesh beneath her probe changed to that of tapping metal, and Laila's eyebrows rose. Focusing on the job at hand, she carefully pushed, poked and prodded until the metal ball rose to the surface. She held it triumphantly aloft. Patrick grinned at her, approval in his eyes. Well done. Laila's heart fluttered.
You should smile more often.
Patrick's cheeks flushed, and he shifted his gaze to Harold's shoulder. Shall I stitch him up? Laila rose from her seat, offering it to Patrick with a teasing grin.
You should blush more too.
Patrick's dimples deepened as he deftly threaded the needle she handed him.
What will happen when you've ended your time here?
Patrick's fingers paused. Could you pour a wee bit of whisky in this before I finish? Laila pulled a flask from a cabinet, then trickled a bit over the wound. Patrick nodded approval. 'Twill help keep infection away.
Infection? What is this?
Patrick sought the right word. Inflammation, so it will nae become putrid. At Laila's nod, he finished setting the stitches in the wound and returned to her earlier question. If I accomplish my task, I'll have a chance to say my piece to Prince Charlie.
Who's this prince?
Patrick's tone deepened, forbidding, sad. Tearlock is the man we rallied to, wishing our own king on Scotland's throne. He failed us.
And then?
Patrick gently tapped the heavy black thread in Harold's skin with the pad of his forefinger, then set his needle aside. And then I shall rest in peace. A corner of his mouth pulled to one side, and he sighed. A likelier truth is that I'll spend the rest of my days missing ye. Her heart lurched. A sad laugh rumbled in her throat.
Why must I believe in ghosts? You're the man of peace and kindness I've waited for, and you'll be gone soon.
Patrick rose to his feet. He slowly gathered Laila in his arms and pulled her against his chest. His heartbeat thrummed steady beneath her ear. As unswerving as his loyalty, as strong as his honour, its cadence an echo of her own. "I cannae change who I am, Machre," he murmured, his face against her hair. "But I've time to change your fate. Let me help you escape." Laila glanced at Harold's still form, the black stitches neat and stark against his pale skin, his breathing regular and steady.
Aye, I can leave now.
Patrick stepped back, leaving her bereft as his arms fell away. "Gather what you need, quickly." She picked a fabric bag from a peg on the wall, opening its drawstring neck to shove clean clothes inside. She reached for a half-eaten loaf of bread as the door to the house slammed open, shuddering as it made contact with the wall. "There's the witch! Seize her!" Chapter 14. Men piled into the room as if shoved by an unseen hand. Weapons rattled in the air, their shadows leaping on the walls like an army of darkness. 2 men grabbed Laila's arms, their eyes flashing with determination and fear. "Stop!" Patrick commanded, but his words fell unheeded. He recognized Eric standing in the doorway, his cloak billowing about his legs. A man, spear in one hand, snatched at Patrick's arm, but he shrugged away. As quickly as they'd entered, the men stormed out through the doorway, dragging Laila with them. She sent him a lingering, agonized look, then glanced away, her head high. Patrick shoved through the door, past the rear of the guard now flanking Laila, but they crowded about her too tightly for him to fight his way through. He leapt about, pushing aside one man, only to find him replaced by another, larger, more determined. Unable to break through to Laila's side, he paced alongside the group, arriving at the coarsely hewn tree stump where Ormarr had rescued her the night before. They shoved her to atop the stump where she stood alone, wind whipping her skirt and hair about her in a frenzied dance. A man Patrick did not recognize stepped next to Laila. He grabbed a fistful of her unbound hair, jerking her head back. "She's been accused of witchcraft and escaped on the back of a dragon she summoned before us all from the pit of hell. What will the clan do with her?" "Burn her!" The cries filled the air. Patrick clenched his fists. Shouldering his way through the crowd, he bounded to the top of the dais and placed himself in front of Laila, shielding her from the angry stares. Laila growled.
"Dinna do this, Patrick."
Patrick ignored her. "This woman is no danger to ye." Hands fisted on his hips, feet spaced firmly for balance, he stared down the glares and shouts and hostile gestures. At last the clamour fell to a low murmur. "Laila has lived among ye since she was born." He sent his gaze over the crowd, their faces becoming distinct, human, evolving from an angry mob. "She has been your healer. Who amongst you has she failed to care for? Has she offered any of you less than kindness and concern?" Gazes met his, fell away amid a spatter of murmurs. "Ye fear her because she's different. She befriended a dragon. Lord forgive me for admitting that Ormarr is her da." But he could not offer such an intimate detail to the crowd. "Thou shalt not suffer a witch among ye," someone bellowed. "She isna a witch," Patrick countered. "She doesna create spells, nor does she conjure."
"She summoned a dragon!"
Affirmative murmurs rose. Patrick stepped to the edge of the stump. "She called his name. If she called your name whilst afraid, would ye help her?" He jerked his gaze from face to face. "Would ye? Did ye?" He stepped back, disgust evident in the deep slant of his brows. I dinna think so. The dragon has more honour than ye do. He snorted, and more guts. The murmurs fell. Feet shuffled, rustling on the grass. Harold limped forward, gripping the arm of a man at his side. A blanket draped over his shoulder, edges flapping gently in the breeze. Heads swivelled in his direction, and whispers slid across the air. He speaks truth. Harold stood before the makeshift dais, leaning heavily against his aid. Though she knew she risked her life, she and Patrick brought me here for help when my own men were immobilized by fear of the beast. He paused, breathing deeply, his pain evident. They could have left me to die on the Forbidden Isle, but they didn't. One leg buckled beneath him, but he caught himself and struggled upright. Let them go. Without waiting to see if any wished to speak against him, he drew away. Eric shrieked accusations of witchcraft from the back of the crowd, his words barely intelligible, his intent clear. Gazes flew from the crazed man to Harold. Harold halted his slow walk through the crowd. Shut him up! Hands grabbed at Eric, pulling him away. Laila's captor released her arm. You're free to go. His glare icy, he leapt to the ground. Taken aback by Harold's support, Patrick lost his voice. Laila pressed against him.
We should go, whilst they obey Harold.
In eager agreement, Patrick grabbed Laila's hand and dragged her to the boat, her feet flying as she sought to keep pace. A puddle of vibrant orange, fading to pale ochre, spilled across the water beneath the glare of the lowering sun. A thread of lilac underscored the line between water and sky as night rushed to gain hold over the short winter day. The little boat tossed on the waves, riding the crest of deep purple and brown. Laila's anxious gaze searched Patrick.
"'Twill be dark soon. What will you do?"
"Dinna fuss over me. I'll be leaving shortly. It would please me to see ye on your way before I go. Mayhap put my back to the oars for a distance." Laila nodded, and he helped her into the boat, his fingers loath to relinquish hers. Hers twined possessively with his. I can do no more than leave her with as much of her heart and pride intact as possible. Patrick gently broke their connection and grasped the oars. The smooth wooden shaft did not fit his hands as well as did Laila's slender fingers. He remembered the memento he'd taken from the dragon's lair. Here. He searched his pocket, offering Laila the pendant. I hope this reminds ye of Ormarr. He scooped the remaining gold coins into his hand. And you'll need these. Laila lifted the crystal heart against the sunset. Amber, gold, and amethyst light burst from its centre.
"'Tis beautiful, Patrick. I will always treasure it."
She accepted the coins absently, her eyes on the pendant.
"'Twill remind me of Ormarr and you."
The oars creaked in their worn oarlocks, adding a querulous note to their impending goodbyes. His gaze sought and held Laila's, seeking to memorize her features, the only memory he wished to carry with him into eternity. It took him several moments to realize they were not alone in the boat. Soni's black cape blended with the deepening shadows, her hands buried deep in the heavy folds. She peered out over the water, but as though sensing Patrick's gaze, angled her head to smile at him. Her face glowed burnished gold in the sunset. Patrick's heart plummeted to his feet.
"I see you've found your bravery, Patrick,"
Soni said, a merry twinkle in her eyes. I suppose you're here to take me back.
"Och, dinna be so glum. You've wished for centuries to be a braw man, and in the space of a little more than a day, you've bested a dragon, and a clan bent on destroying the beast."
She tilted her chin to Laila in a thoughtful manner.
"And yet have saved a witch."
She isna a witch. Patrick's response was instant, protective, challenging. Soni's smile returned.
Of course she is now. Though I will meet her descendant many years from now, who is a witch.
She shrugged.
Though that is merely an interesting side note to this conversation.
Laila's chin lifted in challenge.
You must be Soni. Patrick has spoken of you.
Soni merely smiled.
Aye, and I know you. I'm very pleased to meet you.
She looked around.
I'd hoped to meet Ormarr as well.
Patrick couldn't help feeling smug. You've never seen a dragon before.
Och, surely you didn't think me that old, do you, Patrick? Nay, I haven't met a dragon, though I'd like to.
A large wave lifted the small boat, rocking it to one side. Patrick peered at the ocean, fearful of a sudden storm that could swamp their craft or send them over the side. But no tempest-bearing wind freshened, no white-topped crests rushed toward them. Laila exclaimed, tipping the boat as she half rose to her feet.
"'Tis Ormarr."
Soni's hand shot out, pulling Laila back to her seat.
Dinny does us into the drink. Patrick will see us ashore in a moment.
Patrick chanced to look over his shoulder. Ormarr perched at the edge of the water, one wingtip trailing in the inky water. With a negligent flip of his pinion, he sent them another playful surge. Patrick rolled with the wave, settling the boat firmly. Soni and Laila laughed with glee. He beached the craft and leapt over the side to pull it onto the shore. Laila and Soni piled out unassisted, eager to greet Ormarr. The great dragon unfurled his wings obligingly beneath their admiration and even snorted a small, by dragon standards, stream of smoke and flame. Soni was suitably impressed. Patrick approached the happy group, the sense of being an outsider creeping over him. Ormarr caught sight of him and drew back, settling onto the pebbled ground. He knows I almost led them to his lair. Because of me, they know of the gold. Shame and guilt washed over him. He ducked his head. Ormarr stretched his neck upward, the setting sun glinting off his glistening scales. His wings spread wide, an incredible expanse of delicate hide stretched between long, tapering fingers. A groan escaped him as his features blurred, shrank, skin replacing scales, tail dissolving on a mist, wings drawing inward, until they vanished. I wish to speak to Patrick. Eyes wide with surprise, Patrick stepped closer as Ormarr beckoned. I should have known the sort of man ye are. I sent Laila with ye, knowing ye would love her, care for her. He captured Patrick's gaze. However, I didn't trust ye to give your life for her. Patrick ducked his head, stung. I'm not brave, but I would defend her to my last breath. Ormarr exhaled a thin rasp of smoke. I know that now, and I apologise for doubting ye. I saw ye at the bonfire the night Harold and his ilk captured Laila. In my heart, I feared you would consider them your friends, defend their actions if they claimed her again, or mayhap do naught to stop them. Even if you only knew the men a brief time, it took bravery to stand against them, alone. I know you turned from them in the cave. You couldn't bring yourself to do their bidding, neither for gold, nor the unlikely promise Harold would deliver Laila to ye unharmed. Bleakness filled Patrick's heart. You've stated my case exactly. I didn't know which was the lesser of the evils presented me. Soni smiled, her eyes alight.
Yet you listened to your heart. Once you sought your courage in what others thought of you, you bonded with them, made their cause your own. You fought and died for them, betrayed for seeking your courage in them, when they are only responsible for their own. Today you discovered ye are stronger than ye ever imagined.
She sighed happily.
How does that make you feel, Patrick?
Patrick's heart skipped a beat. Determination flooded him, only to be dashed upon the realization he was about to fail Ormarr once again. Chapter 15. Patrick drew on the newfound well of courage inside him. I cannae be the man ye seek, Ormarr. Realization dawned in Laila's eyes. Soni appeared thoughtful. You're exactly the man I wish to see sure my daughter's life, Ormarr rumbled. I cannae see to her future. 'Tis clear she trusts ye. You're a good man, Patrick. Bitterness filled Patrick's heart. I'm a ghost, Ormarr. My life isna my own. Ormarr's head swivelled toward Soni. Is this true, my young witch?
A ghost, a witch, and a dragon sat on a beach near Broch.
She grinned.
Sorry, it would make a very poor joke.
3 sets of eyebrows lifted. She sighed.
Aye, Patrick is a ghost. He fell at the bloody battle of Culloden Moor many centuries from now.
She folded her hands beneath her cloak.
He's done his heroic deed. 'Tis time for him to move on to his fate.
Laila stepped forward, grasping Patrick's hand.
Ormarr speaks true, Soni. I trust Patrick. You cannae have him.
Soni canted her head, a hint of a smile on her lips.
'Tis not my power to change things, lass. 'Tis out of my hands.
Patrick laughed. Are you saying you haven't been playing with my life and death?
Ah, I wondered if you had found your true voice, Patrick. Still soft, still kind, but firm.
Stop playing games, Soni. I've done my best to get Laila away from those who seek to do her harm. 'Tis I who challenge my fate. I ask ye to alter my boon. He gazed at Laila. I'll barter for what time I can to see ye safe. I care not for speaking to Tirlach. He clasped both her hands in his, wishing so many things. Saddened he would leave her, hoping he could treat with Soni to give him more time. I'm sorry, Mochrie. I didn't mean for this to happen. He did not have to explain himself, for Laila nodded her understanding.
I've fallen in love with you as well, Patrick. How could I have known the man of my heart would wait more than 1,000 years to be born? No matter if we part this night, I will never desire another. What would you have me do?
Soni's muted voice scarcely reached their ears, but Ormarr's grunted challenge broke through to Laila and Patrick. They followed Ormarr's gaze to a dark figure silhouetted against the last dregs of the sun. Patrick set Laila to safety behind him, but she grabbed his waist and peered around him. Who's this? Patrick asked. Soni continued, as though he hadn't spoken.
I've seldom seen two so well matched. Their hearts are true, willing to wait through this lifetime and into the next to be reunited.
The soft pitch of her voice changed.
But you know the bloodline comes through her. Grand Auntie Laila's tales of a dragon are true.
A low rumble of sound came from the heavily cloaked figure, to which Soni did not reply. Tension filled the air, straining, palpable. Patrick didn't dare speak, and then, with a clap of thunder and a flash of green light, the tall figure disappeared. Soni sighed and turned back to the group on the beach.
Uncle Wickham always enjoys a bit of the dramatic.
To Patrick's surprise, she appeared neither frightened nor intimidated by her encounter with the forbidding stranger. Two sensations that were only now bleeding from his system as his heart rate returned to normal.
How much time do you wish, Patrick? Speak truth. I must have something with which to bargain.
Patrick tucked Laila against his side. I wish the rest of my natural life. He gently kissed Laila's brow, and all of eternity. Soni clapped her hands together happily, then raised them above her head, spread to reach to the heavens. The sleeves of her cloak fell back, revealing her slender, pale arms, the colour of moonlight, small, dusky shadows marring her skin. Stars twinkled above on a deep amethyst sky, reflected in the waxing moon. A streak of golden fire lined the horizon as the sun abandoned the world to the night.
Then join with Laila, Patrick Lindsay of Perth. Love her. Safeguard her heart. For your choice is made the more precious with the knowledge of what could have been.
She dropped her hands and stared at Laila and Patrick's startled expressions.
I have a love of the dramatic too,
She confessed.
and I wish to know more of my ancestress and the marvellous tale of how she and her brave shoemaker husband once tamed a fire-breathing dragon.
This has been Patrick, The Ghosts of Culloden Moor, Book 26, written by Cathy McRae, narrated by Andrew McDermott and Jen McGurk. Copyright 2016 by Catherine Dodson. Production copyright by Catherine Dodson.